Now call the October 2016 Board of Regents to order. President Kaler, would you please join me at the podium?
Mr. Chair. Good morning, Em. I know.
Sure, you got off to a very brisk start here. I do that, but I'm happy to be here. Good, very good. Mr. Chair, members of the board, it is my pleasure to introduce our new General Counsel, Douglas Peterson. Doug, would you please join me here at the podium? Doug began his tenure at the university nearly a month ago on September 19th. I think that feels about a year to you, but it's been about a month. And he's already demonstrated great wisdom, strategic thinking, and a warm sense of humor. He comes to us from Stinson Leonard Street LLP, where he was a partner practicing in the areas of complex business litigation and white-collar defense. Previously, he served as an assistant U.S. attorney for the District of Minnesota. He's well-known, well-liked, and well-respected by a diverse spectrum of members of Minnesota's bench and bar. And as a native of Mankato, he has a deep understanding of and special appreciation for our university's impact on the local, regional, and global community. We are very, very fortunate that Doug is the new leader of our exceptional Office of the General Counsel with a remarkable collection of lawyers, paralegals, administrative staffers, and law clerks. Doug, welcome to the University of Minnesota, and if you'd like to say a few words, please do. Welcome aboard.
Thank you, President Kaler, Chair Johnson. Yesterday afternoon, I had the occasion to sit through the committee discussion with regard to admissions. And that was a wonderful reminder to me that the University of Minnesota is the future of Minnesota as well as elsewhere. And so, again, a reminder how much of a privilege it is to be here, to be working with the Regents, the president and his staff, but more importantly, the entire university community. So thank you again for the privilege.
There we go. Almost got away.
One more.
She's going down.
Yeah. Again, Counsel Peterson, thank you for willing to provide legal counsel and service to the University of Minnesota. Today, we as Regents and President Kaler, we are pleased to present an award of outstanding merit to the University of Minnesota Bands. To accept the award, we would like to invite forward Dr. Emily Tryon, Director of Bands, Professor Betsy McCann, Assistant Director of Bands, Drum Major Robert Rudine, and Jerry Lukart, Assistant Director of Bands. If you would be so kind as to come forward as we read the resolution this morning. The Regents of the University of Minnesota recognize with appreciation and sincere gratitude the exceptional dedication, service, and contributions of the University of Minnesota Bands. What began in 1892 as the University Cadet Band with 29 members has evolved into a comprehensive band program with more than 750 engaged and dedicated students. The program has 6 concert bands, including the Distinguished Wind Ensemble, plus an extensive jazz program, 3 pep bands, and the renowned 320-member University of Minnesota Marching Band, the pride of Minnesota. Many storied university traditions have their roots with the marching band, including the use of the Block M as a symbol for the university. An early version first appeared during a halftime show at a Gopher football game in 1910. The University of Minnesota Bands serve as highly recognizable and well-respected ambassadors for the university, performing across the nation and around the globe. In 1965, the marching band performed in the inaugural parade for President Lyndon Johnson and Vice President and University of Minnesota alumnus Hubert Humphrey. In 1969, then the concert band ensemble represented the U.S. in a 7-week tour across the former Soviet Union that concluded with a presidential concert in the White House Rose Garden. It was also the first American university concert band to tour China in 1980. The band's outreach continues today with over 160 performances annually to audiences far and near. On behalf of the university community, the Regents commend the long and meritorious service demonstrated by the University of Minnesota Bands and congratulate the program on its 125th anniversary. This is presented the 14th day of October 2016 on behalf of all of us with deep appreciation for its long and rich history. On a personal note, the University Band was able to travel to my hometown of Willmar a few years ago, presented a concert, and even to this day, on a weekly basis, someone will come up to me and with great appreciation say, "When is the band coming back to Willmar?" Well, we know you have pressures to go many places. So on behalf of the Regents, President Kaler, to what I will call, in an editorial way, the best marching band in the Big Ten and perhaps across America, we congratulate you and your leadership.
Have you step forward? Okay, everybody, go ahead, quick, come forward. Yeah, wait for this. There you go. Perfect. A little bit closer. There. Perfect. Okay. Okay, one more. All right. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. Congratulations.
I put yours on the tray.
Oh, no, they are. Oh,
There's a little exception.
no, you guys are.
I would then direct our attention to the approval of minutes and seek a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. Moved and second. Is there discussion on the minutes? Discussion. If not, all in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion prevailed. President Kaler, we look forward to your report to the Board of Regents.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. There's a lot of system-wide news I'll share with you today. I met yesterday individually with Chancellors Black, Limkeel, Wood, and then all together as part of our system council. That was actually on Wednesday. And we'll be talking about an evolving system-wide strategic plan later in this meeting. So let me start there. Last week, I visited our UMD campus and can report that Chancellor Black has assembled an exceptional leadership team comprised of a group of very capable individuals who are committed to and confident in their decisions, especially as they pertain to solving budgetary challenges. Lynn and his team are also very committed to our university system and UMD's special place in it. I met with a gathering of faculty and staff, and also with student government leaders and leaders of multicultural groups at UMD. And to complete a full day, I visited the Tweed Museum and got a sneak preview of a wonderful exhibit of William Shakespeare's First Folio. It's a book that's about 400 years old and is comprised of more than 30 of his most famous plays. UMD is its one stop in Minnesota for an extraordinary exhibit. And Chancellor Black, as you may know, is a theater person, and so it was fun to spend some time with him at the Tweed, which is expecting record crowds to view the First Folio. I'll be visiting our Rochester campus later this month for a similar visit, meeting with Chancellor Lemkuhl, his leadership team, students, faculty, and staff. Chancellor Lemkuhl is co-leading our system-wide strategic planning effort, and I thank him for that. Meanwhile, our search for a new chancellor at the University of Minnesota Morris is moving along. Final candidates will visit the Morris and Twin Cities campus later this month. And of course, at Crookston, we have bittersweet news. Chancellor Fred Wood told us a few weeks ago that he's retiring at the end of this academic year. His decision reflects his need to return to California to provide care for his extended family. I know that decision was a difficult one, and I'm sad to know that he will be leaving our Crookston campus, but he leaves it in far better shape than he took it. His tireless work in generating campus support and lobbying the state legislature led to a successful completion of the UMC Wellness Center, which will celebrate its grand opening tomorrow. Regent McMillan and Provost Hanson will be among those attending the festivities. We're currently developing a search plan for the next chancellor of the University of Minnesota Crookston with the goal of having a new campus leader in place by July 1 of next year. Now I'm happy to announce the launch of an exciting new system-wide initiative which we're calling the Study Away program. This provides students at any university campus the opportunity to enroll in a unique semester-long program at any other University of Minnesota campus. So like an international study abroad experience, Study Away packages courses in a particular program area for students interested in expanding their education and experiencing a different campus. As part of the course of study, students may be able to finish the majority of credits for a minor. Students will also be able to enroll in the program beginning in spring of 2017, and I believe this program leverages the strengths of each individual campus. For example, a student interested in going to veterinary school someday may want to spend a semester on the Crookston campus studying animal science. A student interested in healthcare may be interested in spending a semester at Rochester, interning at the Mayo Clinic and taking courses in health sciences. It's an important step in the collaboration of our academic programming across the system, and we believe an important and scholarly opportunity for our students. And we've launched a really neat website, which is called studyaway.umn.edu. Turning to our Twin Cities campus, now that the semester has begun, we have some final statistics about our incoming class, and they are very impressive. We have the largest freshman class since 1970, a grand total of 5,880, joined by one of our largest transfer cohorts ever of about 2,300. That means we have more than 8,000 new students in our community. Of our freshmen, we have the average ACT score ever, 28.3, and the highest percentage of students ever, 22.3%. So let me put that in a historical context. The last first-year class to enter General College in 2005 was comprised of 18.5% students of color. And that means we've increased that measure of diversity by about 4 percentage points since then. We continue to make progress increasing students from Greater Minnesota, 17% up this year, up a percentage point since 2011. And our incoming class is almost 65% Minnesota residents, the highest in recent years, and up about 2 percentage points over last year and 5 years ago. But here's a number that I really like, and that continues to drive our goal of increasing our 4-year graduation rates. Our overall retention rate for first-year students was a record high 93.2%. That's 7 percentage points higher than a decade ago. And most encouraging, our retention rate for students of color was even higher, 93.6%, and that's up more than 12 percentage points since a decade ago. And as I like to say, you can't graduate in 4 years if you don't come back for the second year. And it's a statistic that demonstrates our freshmen are satisfied with their student experience. You heard yesterday about our holistic approach to admissions, and clearly we're doing something right, so that's good news. Mr. Chair, members of the board, as you know, there's been a heightened attention nationally and on our campus to the issues of free speech and our ongoing work on creating a welcoming, respectful, and fully inclusive campus climate. We are not yet where we want to be or where we need to be. While we defend free speech and academic freedom, at the same time, we must also recognize that some speech on campus may offend and even profoundly hurt members of our community. We must continue to have constructive dialogues with each other. My goal, and I think your goal, is to have a community in which speech would be free, but where individuals would have awareness and compassion at a level necessary to avoid hurtful words. I'm committed to leading a university that is welcoming and is an inclusive community where there is a respectful campus climate. Let me now turn to this year's marketing campaign launched last month. As I hope you've seen on television, online, in print, or in social media, this year's Driven to Discover campaign emphasizes the university's collective strengths in tackling grand challenges from many angles. I'm most excited because we're featuring the work of our extraordinary faculty, 16 of them actually, in the areas of ending addiction, closing the opportunity gap, protecting human rights, and abolishing hunger. These areas support the Twin Cities strategic plan and align with our ongoing philanthropic priorities. The Driven to Discover brand lifts all boats. It helps citizens see our role in Minnesota in the world, inspires student and faculty recruitment, provides a framework for grant applications, and it enables us to advocate and fundraise. In all that we do, these remarkable research breakthroughs help us tackle the world and state's grand challenges, and as we say in our brand, we're driven to discover. Finally, today we can think very positively about 4th Street, our beloved Dinkytown, and a former member of the Sigma Alpha Mu fraternity. Board members, if Harvard can claim Bill Gates, if Wisconsin can claim Frank Lloyd Wright, and if NYU can claim Lady Gaga, all of whom are dropouts that hurt our 4-year graduation rates, we don't have to think twice about claiming Bob Dylan as ours. Yesterday, he became the 26th person affiliated with our university to win a Nobel Prize, this one for literature. We're excited for his years on and around our campus, and we believe we helped him become the poet and songwriter that he is. With that, Mr. Chair, I conclude my report.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Report of the chair to the board and the university community. Last month, Regent Anderson, Regent Devine, and myself attended a Minnesota Sparks event in Fergus Falls, where we heard from 3 faculty members who are working on some of the issues most critical to our state. Professor Diane Treat Jacobson from the School of Nursing spoke about the work that is being done in rural Minnesota to educate care providers on peripheral artery disease in order to enhance detection and lead to better treatments like exercise therapy. From the Crookston campus, Professor Dan Savarsky described his work in harvesting invasive cattails and research on repurposing them into fuel or nutritional products. And Arnie Kilgard, professor at Morris campus, shared the story of the revolution in green energy that holds the promise of cheap, clean power, but also possesses challenges to the existing utility business model. All 3 presentations highlighted ways the University of Minnesota is fulfilling its land grant mission. We applaud these faculty members and the thousands of others who are making a difference every day. We'll also note that in yesterday's work session, we discussed admissions principles and holistic review. The discussion was directly connected to our board priority to enhance the student experience at each campus. Later in the year, we will have a discussion on learning outcomes and how we can better prepare University of Minnesota graduates for life after college. The Academic and Student Affairs Committee is also having conversations related to this priority. That concludes my report for the month of October, And we will now turn to the consent report. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second? It's been moved and second. Is there discussion? I would note that in the report of the University of Minnesota Foundation Board of Trustees that, and I know you've seen this, but I want to recognize that Regent Beeson has been reappointed, and Regent Lucas is the newest member of the Foundation Board. Regent McMillan agreed to, can I say, relinquish a bit earlier in his term. And Regent McMillan, we thank you for your time and service on the UMF board, and to our two colleagues, the best going forward. We have a motion then before us. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevailed. We'll now receive an overview of the system-wide strategic planning process. Chancellor Lemkool and Vice President Ropers-Haleman, would you please join us at the table? President Kaler, will you begin with some opening comments?
Indeed. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to the leadership and hard work of Chancellor Lemkuhl and Vice Provost Ropers-Hillman, our work on a system-wide strategic plan is moving forward. And as you recall, the purpose of the system-wide strategic planning process was to better align institutional resources and leverage the university's strengths as a system. This plan will draw from existing campus plans, including the Twin Cities plan Driving Tomorrow, and will be mindful of the distinctive mission and strengths of each campus. The goal of the plan is to develop a document that embraces the 21st century land grant mission by articulating the common values, processes, and expectations across our campuses. For the full report, I'm going to turn this over to Steve and Rebecca with my thanks for their important work on this priority for the university. Please.
Thank you. Go ahead and go to the first slide. This is what we would like to cover this morning. I'd like to spend just a few moments sort of setting the stage to talk about the purpose of the system-wide planning effort. The Vice Provost will talk about committee membership and the proposed process, and then we're very interested in getting feedback from you about whether we're moving in the right direction. You know, as the President mentioned in his introduction, system-wide planning process is historic. Even though we have never focused on ourselves as a university system in this way, we still can point to system-wide approaches that have benefited all campuses, extension, and research outreach centers. You know, for example, the installation of the enterprise-wide systems in finance, human resources, and student benefits all of us. This system-wide approach lowers our academic costs and improves the quality of services. A system-wide procurement strategy, leveraging our size and purchasing common goods, lowered our cost. And we developed, and we tend to forget, we developed a system-wide strategy for library services so we can more effectively and efficiently meet our scholarly and information needs for all faculty and students. And I can provide other examples. In my opinion, these system-wide efforts were advanced and were successful because they addressed our common needs, using common administrative processes. But we also have to admit that on the academic side of the house, we haven't made as much progress taking such system-wide approaches. Why? In my opinion, it has to do with the distinctiveness of our academic missions. Each campus has a distinctive mission shaped by its history and place. Our extension offices or research outreach centers have local community connections that by design influence their unique programming and services and research. It is more difficult to leverage differences. At least you need to think about them differently. So we've had some success leveraging our commonalities, and this has happened mainly on the administrative side. The key question is, can we leverage our differences, primarily on the academic side, to better serve the students, faculty, and stakeholders across the state? For the Vice Provost and I, this is the challenge that excites us. If we can deploy a system mindset, can we leverage our collective abundance, created by connecting our distinctiveness, and do so without compromising, maybe even enhancing the excellence of each unique mission? We think so. Now, in a prior life, I was a senior system officer for over a decade, and I'm quite familiar with university systems. And I can tell you, if we can figure out how to fully take advantage of our academic distinctiveness across the system, we will distinguish ourselves as an excellent connected system, which is more than a collection of excellent campuses. And we believe that by connecting our distinctiveness, we will better serve the citizens of the state. And I just have to mention at this point, think about the Study Away initiative that the president just mentioned. So if we create this system mindset, if we create this system mindset, we believe that we can better align our resources and leverage our strengths. We can connect our existing plans to promote some system-level clarity about who we are. We believe we can better guide our decision-making and mine new opportunities and pursue them. And collectively, with doing all these things, we can much more fully embrace what it means to be a 21st century land-grant institution. So we need to ask ourselves the questions of our colleagues around the state. Who are we as a university system? How do we ensure that our unique and collective strengths are accessible to students, faculty, and Minnesota communities and other stakeholders? And how can this system mindset guide decision-making and resource allocations in our planning? But now I'd like to turn this over to the Vice Provost, and so she can talk to you about the processes that we plan to use to try to accomplish our goals.
Thank you very much, Chancellor. Professor Hillman.
Great. Thank you. So we, of course, need to convene a group of people to help us with this project, and I hope you'll all see yourselves as key stakeholders in this initiative, too. We're bringing together a committee of folks from around all 5 of our campuses, students, undergraduate and graduate students, faculty members from a variety of places, administrators who have system-wide responsibilities, and then also leaders from the various campuses who have both undergraduate and graduate education responsibilities. Important to note is that when we consulted with the chancellors and Provost Hanson about who they would like to see in these roles, we were asking for people who thought not only of the campus on which they were situated, but also for folks who either had some experience or some perspective that would help them understand that we were indeed a system, that we moved beyond, that the University of Minnesota was not just one individual place or one individual campus. And the list, which is not quite finalized, but it is shaping up very, very nicely to have people who would contribute to helping us think about and move on and find innovative ideas related to the system mindset that Chancellor Lemkuhl referred to. We propose to move forward in 3 phases, moving into the inquiry phase right away, very, very, very soon. We see this inquiry phase as the main input stage where we would seek responses to the questions that Chancellor Lemkuhl articulated earlier. Steve and I will travel to each of the campuses and will be joined by committee members from that campus to listen to the various constituencies. So we're hoping to have a broad opportunity for feedback from across the campuses. You may have seen that we also have a work session with you in December where we hope to get your good ideas to fuel and provide input into the plan. The second stage, the synthesis stage, will largely happen, or the majority of it will happen in January of 2017, where we hope to spend a good chunk of time together with the entire committee so that people can hear from each other and have input from each other. We'll consider new opportunities to leverage a system-wide perspective that could benefit the students and citizens across the state. And we also hope to find ways to enrich system opportunities for faculty and staff, to consider how to create synergies between academic programs, and how to make policy decisions that use the existence and diversity of our system's campuses to position ourselves better in the state. And finally, the third phase that we propose is an affirmation phase, which would largely happen in the spring semester, where we share our recommendations and ideas with each of the campuses, the campus groups again, with President Kaler, and with you, to present the committee's thoughts and better understand the feasibility and desirability of the things that have been coming up through the committee's collection of input and processing and synthesis. So at this point, We are very excited to hear your thoughts on this approach. And while we, of course, would welcome any comments that you have or any questions or thoughts from the board, we do have 3 key questions that would be particularly useful for us in determining moving forward.
Very good. Thank you very much for the presentation. Comments, questions of members of the board? Regent Devine, please.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, let me thank you for your work and your initial outlining. This is an important step, and I think clearly it was in the board's priorities to reach in a much more broad way. One comment that I might make that you might consider in your proposed committee membership would be the inclusion of maybe either an alum and or some community business people that could also be participants in the outreach process of what we're doing right now. I think these collaborations of public-private sector relationships, particularly where the campuses are located, I think is an important step that the university needs to expand on. And I think that this project that we're unfolding here would be a wonderful, welcoming venue as part of that. So thank you for your work and looking forward to the progress.
Thank you very much. Further comments from Regents? Regent Rocha, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really excited to see this. I think this is critical. You've heard me talk about it before at this table, Mr. President. Once or twice. And I was very pleased to see the thought process and the analysis and the inclusion of the various groups. I was also very happy to see that we're going to have an opportunity with the board in December to talk a bit about our perspective, which I think is essential as the elected representatives of the 4 corners of the state. And I think you're on the right track. A couple things that I would suggest, and this of course is formed by my experience. One of the reasons why we were able to get this amazing report from the president about the quality of our students and the success and retention of our students compared to where the university was a few decades ago, was working really closely with the rest of the state. And so I would ask whether it becomes a part of the official committee process, but at least, perhaps a series of conversations between the president and leaders of MNSCU, leaders at the state legislature, because we could not have made the leap from an open enrollment institution to being one that has a selectivity without having worked with MNSCU and understanding that we play a role within a higher education system that also includes private institutions as well. So to the extent we can get that kind of input in the process so that there is not necessarily full-on ownership, but at least a sense that we didn't do this in a vacuum, kind of running down our own road, I think that will serve us well. And understanding that this strategic plan also has the dramatic impact of our ability to continue to generate support from the state. And the state has to be a partner for our institution, and as much as we're frustrated by the reduction in support over time, we still are supported very well compared to virtually all of our peers nationally. So to the extent we can get that kind of input and work together in crafting a strategic plan for the most significant, in my view, higher educational institution in the state, I think we'll serve ourselves well, and I really look forward to this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. Regent McMillan, please.
Thank you, Chair Johnson, and I would echo my colleagues' comments about the importance of capturing the statewide support. So 2 questions. One being, is there a master list of where each campus is at with respect to its own strategic plan and how that fits into this? So I'm pretty familiar with, obviously, our Grand Challenges plan, which is a curricular plan for the Twin Cities. UMD has one. I think some kind of a little cheat sheet for us as when drafted, is it being, at a campus level or perhaps even a college level in some of the bigger colleges. That would be helpful so we see how, we don't want to finish this and then I'll make it up, UMD finish one a year later, and it's like, how did we match them up, or did we match them up? So that'd be one question. And then a second would be, where do we capture input from the outreach piece of our 3-part mission here in the research facilities? I want to be sure we don't just end up with, it's a Herculean task to put a curricular strategic plan together, but bringing in that research, and that ties into Regent Rocha's question, I think.
Thank you, Regent McMillan. President Kaler for comment.
Thank you. I'll comment and then ask my colleagues at the table if they want to add to it. Strategic, to your first point, strategic planning is either fortunately or unfortunately, I suppose, a dynamic process. So our campuses are in different places in the timelines that attend to these kind of planning exercises. For example, we just have completed the Driving Tomorrow plan on the Twin Cities campus. Chancellor Black has been at Duluth long enough that his strategic plan is due for a polishing, let me call it, Chancellor Black. We're obviously going to have new leadership at both Crookston and Morris, unfortunately in both cases, but time does move forward. And it will be incumbent upon those new leaders in the next, you don't need to do it instantly, but in the next couple of years to develop plans around where they are. Rochester continues to move forward, and I don't know where Chancellor Limkeel is in his plan. But all of those are moving, and at any given point in time, they're going to be at different levels of maturity. Nonetheless, what we need to do now in this system-wide plan is really to build the linkages and the connections and the go-forward strategy. That's not just curricular. In fact, curricular parts of this will be relatively minor since those are driven by campus activities where the students are. But really to talk about resource allocations and alignment, to Regent Roche's point around engagement with the private college council, we will do that with Larry Poggemiller and others in the state and the legislature. We will do all of that, but it's just not possible, I think, to have complete registry with the maturity of plans in a variety of ways. And Steve or Rebecca, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Vice Provost Hellman?
Thank you, Chair Johnson. And Regent McMillan, I just wanted to address the second part of your question about the research outreach centers and extension. That was something that several weeks ago we saw with President Kaler's direction that was a hole in what we were thinking. And we have added Dean Brian Burr and also Dean Bev Durgan because of their roles in research outreach centers and extension. We've additionally talked with the chancellors and are hoping to have, when we go out and visit the various campuses, to also have interaction with the faculty and the staff who are working in the research outreach centers and explicitly include those folks, not only in the committee structure, but also in our visits.
Great, thank you.
Regent Cohen, please, and then Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. Thank you, presenters, and thanks for the work that you're about to do. I do think it's a really important endeavor, and I think it very much aligns with two things that we talked about yesterday. We talked about the admissions among the system campuses, and I think the idea that we're going to study away, I think, is a wonderful idea and could help students see themselves at one place and also realize that they could take advantage of some of the offerings at one of the other campuses. And it also aligned very much with what we discussed at the Academic and Student Affairs Committee when we talked about enhancing the student experience. So I'm really thrilled to hear about this endeavor, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Regent Cohen. Regent Hsu, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, too, am pleased to see this topic getting underway. I do want to make sure that we address the financial future of the university at the same time, because I think the two are definitely related. We had a good discussion yesterday, and I think we're going to have a discussion next year on the budget lever, revenue levers, and cost drivers, et cetera. And I do think I do hope we're looking at out-of-the-box ideas about how we can deliver education in the future.
Thank you. Further comments?
Can I respond?
President Kaler.
Thank you. Chair Johnson, Regent Hsu, that's a great point, and that really does reflect on what the overall future of our enterprise and our business model is about. That is not a prime focus of this group. They certainly will talk about, I suspect, different ways of delivery on campus, online, et cetera. But the financial future model is really a challenge that's going to be owned by Brian Burnett when he gets here next month and his team as we begin to work with the board around ideas about what the future looks like there. So you should expect some of that to be touched on by this group, but the primary responsibility is going to be with our new COO and CFO.
Regent Shu.
Follow-up, Mr. Chair, thank you. Is Brian Burnett going to be on this committee?
Chair Johnson, Regent Shu, he is not. Again, there's that's a big elephant, and Brian needs to get here, get his feet on the ground, and then tackle that. So just the timing of that is going to be a little bit behind where the work strategy here. It will certainly inform. There'll be a handshake at the end of the process, but he will not be explicitly involved in this process.
Thank you. Further comments, questions? If not, Vice Provost Hellman and Chancellor Lemke, thank you very much for your work and the work you're going to do.
Thank you for what you're about to do.
Our next item is a overview of the major budget levers. I invite Interim Vice President Molnar and Mr. Counsel to join us. Mr. President, some opening comments.
Thank you, Chair Johnson, members of the board. The purpose of this item is to review the financial concepts that will help inform discussions about and development of our FY 2018 budget and beyond. It's an important follow-up to the thoughtful budget framework discussion we had last month. And once again, we will be talking and thinking through the various revenue and cost levers that we face in balancing our budget. With the help of Associate Vice President and Budget Director Julie Tonneson, we'll provide some new context and new ways to think about our budget process. I look forward to the presentation, as always, and a robust conversation that will help us move forward. So, Julie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Tonneson.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. Members, good morning. This discussion on budget levers is really a follow-up to the work session we had in September on the FY18 budget framework, and also on the discussion yesterday in the Finance Committee on long-range financial planning. There are multiple ways we could have chosen to address this topic. As you probably realize, there are hundreds of variables that could be construed as levers in the budget development process. And it is safe to say that levers can be an immediate tool to impact the next year's budget, but it also can be seen as a vehicle to talk about longer-term strategic ways to implement change. As we mentioned yesterday, one outcome of these discussions could be an identification of a number of higher priority levers to focus on in planning immediate and future budgets, and that would be helpful. It is our path today and our intent to present some definitions and concepts to potentially help you frame your thinking about budget levers. So overall, the agenda for today is first we're going to talk about some revenue levers, making a distinction between the framework versus non-framework revenues and how we think about those in the budget. We'll talk about reallocation as a budget lever, and then circle back to some of the levers we presented in September specific to FY18. We'll also talk about some cost drivers, the categories of spending we have and trends there, and a different distinction here between an object view of expenditures and a functional or activity-based view of expenditures, and then again some levers for 18. We are not proposing anything specific with this presentation or asking you to consider specific recommendations. Instead, we designed this to be a presentation of concepts and considerations for you as we think together about the upcoming budget. So first, we deliver to you each year a fully balanced all funds budget. The FY17 approved budget, as you see here, was approved at $3.2 billion for non-sponsored fund revenues. Generally, over time, these revenues grow an average of 1% to 2% per year. The FY17 budgeted revenue was 1.2% greater than the FY16 estimate at the time. However, for budget development purposes, we make a distinction between what we call framework funds and non-framework funds. In this slide, one of three to help explain this, you can see that we want you to think about tuition and the state support, mostly the O&M appropriation, as distinct from the other non-sponsored funds on the left side of the pie chart. This is important for understanding how we incorporate them into the budget development process. On the left, we acknowledge that much of the budget process focuses on the large discretionary funds that can be applied to all missions of the university, including support functions, and can be applied to across all units of the university. We make decisions about how to increase or decrease them, how to direct or redirect them within the institution, all with the goal of making each aspect of the university as successful as possible. The narrative of the budget document focuses here because the institutional strategic choices generally occur in these funds. On the right side here, the non-framework funds are thought of slightly differently. The goal here is to increase them as possible and appropriate in order to cover their associated costs and foster program growth, and sometimes even to grow enough to take over costs that have been covered by other revenues, including those on the left. For example, if a particular endowment happens to be growing, perhaps it can pick up a larger proportionate share of a faculty member's salary that used to be covered from O&M. Or if there's steady increases in ICR revenue, perhaps they can pick up more of the supplies and equipment spending that used to occur in O&M, and so forth. These non-framework funds are generated by specific activities taking place in the units, so they vary by unit in terms of type and significance, which leads to why we treat them differently. Often these funds are restricted to a particular purpose. We get private gifts specific for scholarships, for example, or collegiate fees that are designed specifically for student services. They vary by unit in type and significance, and they cannot be moved from one unit where they were generated to another unit where they were not. Growth can be extremely slow or very sporadic. Royalty income, for example, from a new invention, or a new grant generating ICR in one year that doesn't occur in another. The next slide shows the change in some of these revenues over the last 5 years. The rate of change has generally been in the 2 to 3% range, with the ICR revenues flat to falling overall, and one great year in gifts and endowments that kind of skewed the 5-year trend there. If you remove that year, then the gifts and endowment category also it runs about 1.9% average annual change and or $4 million. These non-framework funds are important. They are monitored and estimated centrally, but they are generally actively managed at the unit level because they are inconsistent across units in terms of their availability and their trend. You can see some of the different unit dependencies in a chart we might have shared with you before. This chart shows a number of different things, but it does, including the relative size of some of these units, but it shows the distribution of revenues across the Twin Cities colleges and major academic units and the system campuses. This is FY16 data for all funds. It makes evident the different revenue dependencies of the various academic units. So for example, the royal blue color on the chart is tuition. And you can see that the Carlson School of Management, the Duluth campus, the College of Liberal Arts, the law school, and so forth are quite dependent on tuition as a proportion of their total revenue. If you're looking at sponsored grants and contracts and ICR, there it's the medical school, public health, the centers and academic health centers shared. They're dependent on that activity for their operations. The state appropriation, which is the green piece, appears in every one of these academic units, but it is more significantly important in some than others. The Morris campus, the College of Food, Agricultural, Natural Resource Sciences, and Minnesota Extension, for example. And finally, if you're looking at fees and sales income, the College of Veterinary Medicine, the dental school, the medical school, they are quite dependent on that as that represents their clinical activities, much more dependent there than in other units. Ultimately, we balance the budget at this level of the institution, and then we sum it up to bring you the all funds budget. So depending on the unit, the non-framework revenues are levers to the extent that we can take action to grow them and direct them to priority spending areas. And the framework revenues are levers each year across the institution as we request state dollars and make changes to tuition through enrollment and rate changes. And then there's one more regular resource lever in our toolbox most people don't immediately think about in that vein, and that is reallocation. As we've discussed before, in the budgeting process, when we implement reallocations, we generally think about that as expenditure reductions being implemented in order to free up revenues to pay for something else. We combine that freed up revenue with available state appropriations and tuition, in the case of the framework funds, in order to pay for cost increases and investments in the budget. And we do that same thing in the other non-sponsored funds. Freed up revenues there are used to cover cost increases or priority investments when the revenue growth is not sufficient. One way to think about this or understand it is as an alternative to changes in those other revenues. This chart shows the approved reallocations that were part of the annual budget for FY12 through FY16, and then the amount of undergraduate tuition rate increase or state appropriation increase that would have equated to. So in FY16, for example, that $30.5 million of planned actions to reduce expenditures paid for the same amount of cost increase as a 7% increase in undergraduate tuition rate would have, or a 4.7% increase in our state appropriation would have. It takes the place of these types of other revenue increases. It's been an important part of our resource planning when our revenue opportunities have been constrained. So to summarize our approach for the revenue levers in the budget, for non-framework funds, we would continue to grow where possible and appropriate, always being mindful of costs that drive the fees students pay. For the state appropriation, we would seek increases to advance our priorities and those of the state at the same time, ensuring that in dollars and percentage terms, our proposed increases are reasonable given the state of the economy. And for tuition, we would implement the approved enrollment management plan on the undergraduate side, which I'll talk about more in the next slide, and base changes in the graduate and professional rates on many of the same considerations as we do on the undergraduate rates, looking at market comparison, student debt impacts, enrollment demand, and so forth. And finally, for reallocations, we would determine the appropriate level and purpose of this tool each year in the budget process. As I mentioned, just to dig a bit deeper on the approach to tuition, the implications of the approved enrollment plan on tuition as a lever are summarized here. For the Twin Cities campus, there are 4 approved plan statements that directly impact how we think about changes in tuition. One statement explicitly dealing with enrollment, which in addition to impacting cost estimates, has implications for building revenue increases into the budget. And then 3 more statements related to rates, where they are in comparison to our peers and how fast they should change. So each year we build recommendations to achieve these goals while considering cost of attendance, peer comparisons, enrollment demand, and so forth. Although not depicted here, there are similar considerations for the system campuses as well, paying attention to rates there to positively impact recruitment and retention efforts, and paying special attention to the regional competitiveness of their tuition rates. So to tie this back to the discussion we had in September, we showed you the impact of a standard change in these various revenue levers, all else being equal, which you see on the left side of this chart. I've since added in the non-framework revenues bullet so as to not lose sight of the fact that we do factor that into our budget balancing as well. As depicted here, these levers take on more of an immediate role in balancing next year's budget. But considered differently, they could be discussed in terms of long-range goals, much like you have with the enrollment management plan, that can guide annual recommendations into the future. We can talk about any priorities or thoughts you have on these levers in the discussion today and throughout the budget development process, but first I want to move on to the expenditures as levers. To remind you of our current year approved budgeted expenditures, on the non-sponsored side, we're projecting $3.1 billion, 61% of which is salaries and fringe. You can see the other expenditure categories with supplies, services, and miscellaneous being the next largest at 18%. The growth over FY16 estimated levels with this $3.1 billion was 1.5%. The trend in total expenditure changes over the last 20 years is depicted on the next slide. It shows that the average annual growth adjusted for inflation has been about 1.5% per year. Within these spending totals, the categories with the highest rates of growth over the last 7 years or so. What you might consider real cost drivers in the budget have been supplies and services at 8.4%, equipment at 7.8%, and repairs and maintenance at 6.4%. But for budget planning purposes, that isn't immediately helpful to think about those categories because they're spread very broadly throughout the institution and across all functions and activities. For budget planning around expenditures, we have another distinction to talk about. Instead of framework versus non-framework, as we did on the revenue side, here it is helpful to think about object versus function. Many of the reports we produce and the analysis we do, as well as many of the cost levers in budgeting, are from the perspective of object of expenditure. When we talk about salaries or fringe or equipment or utilities, that's this object view. It's valid and important, and much of our expenditure reporting displays information in this way. But often in strategic planning around the budget, we talk more from a functional or programmatic view, whether it is expanding program X, investing in new faculty cohorts, or understanding the institutional investment in compliance activities, for example. Those are all from a functional view of expenditures. We have to do both, and that makes thinking about cost levers just a bit more complicated. In various presentations, you've seen us depict the cost categories in the budget as this. The maroon boxes are more of an object view of expenditures, and the gold box is more where the functional view comes in. And it's only complex because we find ourselves going back and forth between these views in the same conversation. So as you think through where to go with these categories of levers, we wanted to offer 3 considerations. First, for both object and functional views of costs, the real choices center around demand. What do we want more of, and what do we want less of? The types of questions we can ask for the institution as a whole or at the campus or collegiate level are displayed here. There are questions we face annually in the budget process, questions that must be answered in order to produce a budget document. Things like the annual decision on salary increases, which priority investments should be made to expand the mission or build strength in some area, which activities should we stop doing to achieve our reallocation
Put her on
goals.
if you are ready.
And then there are questions we face regularly, but that are not necessarily tied neatly to the annual budget process. When there are space concerns, should we expand or contract our total footprint and how? Or which types of administrative activities do we need to implement or restructure? And what do we need to invest in order to address capacity issues in some areas, and so forth? This second group of questions represents choices we make that impact the budget sometimes for years to come. And then many times these questions are posed and answered at the functional level, but they are actually implemented at an object level. So for example, if we decided that we wanted to have the best ranked library in the country, there's no one line item spending you will see in the budget for that. Instead, we'll allocate dollars for salaries to hire more and more highly skilled librarians. We might allocate dollars for equipment, for facilities and systems and so forth. Similarly, an example on the reduction side might be that we decide to eliminate an academic program. Again, there is no one line item that's described there. Instead, we reduce salary expenditures by not replacing a faculty member or by eliminating administrative positions. We will reduce general operating costs in terms of services and facility costs and so forth when we decide to eliminate that program. This second example of a functional decision implemented at the object level leads to the third consideration, which is one of time. The impact of expense decisions is often recognized in the annual budget over time. As an example of how it can play out, we can take the decision from the previous slide to eliminate an academic program. You might decide that in year 1, and maybe right away in that year you can eliminate some support costs because a new cohort of students is not admitted into the program. That shows up in the budget as a reduction in general operating costs. In years 2, 3, and 4, and we might be able to show an elimination of a position or two by not replacing a retiring faculty member or by eliminating a support function as the student numbers and the faculty and so forth decrease. So each year there are discrete things described in the budget But when when the program is finally eliminated in year 4 or 5, and we can say that it's eliminated, in that year, we can't really talk about its impact on the budget because we've already talked about all the changes leading up to that. So it makes it difficult to talk about. None of this is to suggest that we don't make decisions around levers or around cost levers. We absolutely do. It's just to make the point that we need to recognize the various ways those decisions impact the annual budget. They often do not flow as nicely or as directly as we would hope for in the communication purposes. So what you saw in September as the cost side levers in the budget reflects these various views. Again, we presented the impact of a standard change in these variables, all else being equal. So for example, a 1% salary increase plus associated fringe for all employees across all funding sources would cost $49.5 million for FY18, and so on. Additionally, I put the ranges of increase we would consider, quote, normal for things like strategic choices and operations. And I added the note about the cost decrease side because clearly reducing costs is a lever in the budget that essentially becomes part of the reallocation process. We create reallocation or cost reduction targets to create an amount of resource we need to invest and balance. Our task over the next several months is to think through the various choices we have on both the revenue and expense side of these levers, and to work with our units to determine what the priority needs and opportunities are for each of them, for specifically developing the FY18 budget. This concludes what we wanted to present for budget lever concepts, and we welcome your discussion on what you might think some priority levers should be, both for next year and also for the longer range financial plan.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tonneson. And Regent Simmons now, I believe, is on the phone. Is that correct, Regent Simmons? I do not believe she is on the phone. Anyway, now, thank you. Questions, comments?
Yes.
Regent Simmons?
Yes, thank you, Chair Johnson. I am on. I'm going to have you on mute because I have some background noise. I have some comments right now. Thank you.
Very good. And we're on item number 8 on the major budget levers, presentation by Ms. Tonneson in regard to the agenda. Regent Broad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate this. I think this is a fantastic presentation to outline and kind of scope some guardrails around our decisions. But one of the things that occurs to me as we think about levers is, you know, these are levers around what we have or you know, kind of what we deal with what we have. So the strategic thought I have in my mind is, what if we put sunsets around spending from the start? How does that then interact with your ability to make decisions? I'm looking at that chart that, you know, it takes 4 years to back ourselves out of some spending. If you sunset, for example, there's certain spending that would be easier to sunset than others. Say an entity. I'm trying to think of those. A center. Thank you. The centers. I mean, if we go into a center with an end date, the backing out of that end date is very different than if we go into a center and then try to back it out over time. So I'm thinking about the interaction between foundation spending and university spending and how that traps us into great things that maybe need an end date. So I maybe just throw that out as a thought. It's not really probably well thought out, but the sunset concept in budgeting is, I think, interesting.
President Kaler first, please.
Thank you, Chair Johnson, Regent Broad. You know, you're 100% right, and I would think it's fair to say that we try to do this. The problem is that once you begin something, there becomes a certain sense of entitlement, and it's very difficult operationally to unwind these things. That's just it's a fact of academic life everywhere, not just here. So we're moving towards a system in which, if we do invest in a center, we have very clear written documentation about this is what we're going to do and this is how long we're going to do it, and then we're going to have a checkpoint and a review. But it is hard, and I'll give a slightly longer answer. I could go on a great deal about this. It is the nature of the academic culture. And it's particularly challenging if, as part of that activity, you hire people, and they then have, if they're a P&A, they have a year contract. If they're faculty or tenured faculty, of course, then we have a long obligation to them. So it's a great idea in principle. We try to implement it, but it's difficult to ultimately do.
Very good. Not that you can't handle these responsibilities, Ms. Tonneson, but I see Mr. Volno, Mr. Callison back here. If you'd like to come up and just provide some support and perhaps be available for questions, that'd be good too.
Mr. Chairman, I just had a follow-up.
Regent Broad.
I appreciate the complexities around that, but I really just wanted to go back to what the president originally said, was that I was 100% right.
The record will show that.
Well, what you didn't hear, Regent Broad, you're 100% right, but we're not going to do it or change. That's exactly the answer.
Mr. Chair.
Regent Omari.
Thank you. I know I probably wasn't next in your log, but, it's an interesting concept, and it's also a very, we have to be careful about it, right? Because the thing that I worry about is the 3-year grant cycle, right? Where, we offer millions of dollars from the federal government to solve the world's largest problem, and if it's not done in 3 years, then we're going to cancel it, right? So I would just offer the cautionary around, if we're going to be looking at something like that, we have to be very realistic about whether or not we expect something to be solved or done in a certain time frame, and what that means, what levers we can pull on if it's not solved.
Further comments? Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. As I said yesterday, I think we need to also have a better understanding about what our true capacity is. I don't get a feel that in the year and a half that I've been on the board that we have a better understanding of capacity, and I'd like to try to start understanding that in terms of, if you go back to the chart, I think it was slide 7. So here you can kind of see that there are a lot of colleges, or units, as you mentioned, who are dependent on various sources of revenue, such as tuition. I think, one of our greatest priorities is the medical school, and yet you can see here that the medical school eats up a lot of state appropriation. In fact, it's the largest user of state appropriation. And tuition is rather small, and then, of course, you have all these other areas. Could you help me understand, the medical school, that's not a lot of students, but yet the number of resources, the amount of resources we're spending is quite significant, and it doesn't seem to be enough because we're not really getting back up the ranking scale.
Ms. Tonneson?
Chair Johnson, Regent Hsu, you're right in that there are relatively not as many students, but this funding represents what it costs not only to instruct all of those students, but also to support the research infrastructure and all of their clinical activities and everything that runs through the medical school. So this is an all funds, all activities view of their budget. So, for example, the state appropriation support, as we've mentioned in other venues and other committees, the state appropriation is not only for instruction, it's used a great deal to support the research infrastructure in these schools. It's expensive to do not only the instruction, but that research. And so I think what you're seeing there is a reflection of those other pieces of the mission as well.
Regent Hsu?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So has it always been this way, or is this kind of something that we've been kind of increasing the state appropriation allocation to the medical school over some recent time frame?
Ms. Thompson?
Chair Johnson, Regent Hsu, to some extent it has always been this way, but what you see also reflected here is the recent $15 million large increase that was appropriated to the medical school just in the last biennium, so that adds to it. But the general pattern you're seeing here has been, at least since we started showing the revenues this way, has been pretty standard. The larger units have larger amounts of state appropriation.
Regent Hsu?
Could you go to the page where you talk about tuition, please?
Regent Hsu, would you say that again, please?
Could you please go to the page where you talk about tuition?
Tuition. Where did I talk about tuition? This one?
Yes. So my question is, we've had a lot of talk about NR rates, and we have had some talk about the admissions process yesterday. And I'm wondering if you have any specific, specific recommendations on how we can deal with trying to get to the midpoint of the Big Ten, and whether or not it makes sense to get there sooner, but then rather than later, and then kind of give more waivers and other things to try and lower the net cost of tuition.
President Kaler?
Thank you, Chair Johnson. Regent Hsu, I'll take that since that is a policy question. And a lot of that, at the end of the day, all of that depends on this board. I mean, we will bring you models and options. Clearly we could get there tomorrow with probably a pretty huge impact on the number of students who come back next year. Or we can go more gradually, and as we've had earlier this year, and will continue to have. I think there's a spectrum of opinion about the rate on this board, but we will bring you some models, and we'll continue to have a robust discussion about the trajectory and the timing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Regent Hsu. Regent Beeson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We talked about this at Finance a little yesterday. Trying to step back from this data and this report and thinking about how the board interacts with the issues you've identified. We have an operational excellence program that's beginning to close down. We talked about replacing it with something else that might look different, but it would incorporate these elements, both revenue drivers and expense drivers. And my suggestion yesterday was we can't go through line item by line item and expect that those are all going to be priorities. But if we identified a dozen large and underdeveloped areas or understudied areas and brought those back to either the Finance Committee or this group over a period of time, so we could together, after you study them, really understand the elasticity of those numbers or the risk with those numbers. But I mean, one of those is NR, and we're already sort of on that way, studying that number and tracking that number. But there's other categories that have impact on and drive our long-range financial plan.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Volner or Mr. Kelson, would you like to grace us with some of your knowledge?
Chair Johnson, members of the board, be happy to comment on that. I think as we put together the work plan going forward with the Finance Committee, we can start to think about what are the plans for addressing those as we wind down the 6-year, $90 million plan. And as we bring on the new senior VP, I would want to make sure that we provide that person with an opportunity to infuse the discussion with his experience and wisdom.
Mr. Kelson, any comments? You don't have to, but
no, none at this
good.
time. We had a robust discussion yesterday, I think, on some
Very
of these.
good. Regent
levers.
Broad.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I had one more thought. How do we incent within the budget? How do we incent best practices and creativity at the local level? Because I think there is a lot of creativity, it seems, at the local level around how things could work better. And there's been a couple of cases, I'm thinking about CEHD and a few others, that are very creative. And if we imported some of what they do to other places, or whether they imported it themselves, how do we incent that? Because that incenting something might be another lever.
Ms. Tonneson?
Chair Johnson, Regent Broad, that's an excellent point. And our budget model is set up so that we are able to do that, but it still takes actual conscious decision to make it stick. And when I say that, what we have to do and what we work to do is when a unit has ideas to, let's say, raise a new revenue, we have to be careful in the budgeting process that when we balance the budget at that unit level, we don't eat up all of that new revenue with just cost increases or, maybe giving it to some other unit or something. We have to be careful in how we manage that so that they actually reap the benefits of their activity. And so we're set up to be able to do that, and we work to do that with the units, but it is an individual conscious decision and part of the process to make it happen, if that makes sense. It
Thank
is
you.
possible.
Regent Shu.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I forgot to say that I understand that one of our Carlson School professors who's an expert in pricing has volunteered to help us analyze the NR rates as well as the resident rates. And I hope we're making data available to him to do that analysis.
Okay, very good. Further, Regent Anderson?
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I really enjoy this presentation. I kind of consider myself a dollar and cents type of guy. That's S-E-N-S-E. And I looked at this pie chart, and I think one of the things we do is we spend a lot of time, it's just popped in my head, on framework revenue. And we should. They're big types. They're 48% of our budget comes from tuition, or our revenue is tuition and state support. So we should always be mindful of that. But it also shows that 52% comes from other sources, which doesn't always jump out at us. And it made me think of an initiative I know our alumni and UMF is doing. They raised $240 million from roughly 75,000 donors last year, and yet we have 440,000 living alumni. So we're only collecting from 18% of those. The type, and I know they have an initiative to get more and are working more together. So this is just a comment. Maybe we find some initiatives that can increase. Maybe we have a better way of writing for grants, better way of doing sales and internal sales. But that is already 52% of our revenue, and yet we spend so much time on the other 48. I think maybe we should look at that other 52% to try to raise as much as we can, which would help us with tuition and state support. That's my comment.
Thank you, Regent Omari. Mr. Volno?
Chair Johnson, Regent Anderson, what I was going to say is that I think that that's a great idea. If you look at the rest of that pie chart, you end up really having to develop strategies for each section of the pie chart, because each one of them represents a set of complexities and a set of unique rules, let's say, around how the funds are used, how the accounting model works, how the budget model works. So it's a great idea, but there's added complexity to bore into each one of them.
And Chair Johnson, I'll just add that also plays out differently, as you saw in that bar chart, in each college, in each academic unit. So it is a series of strategies.
And my point, Chair Johnson,
Mr. Anderson?
That's another strategy for raising our revenue without going to our legislators and our.
Absolutely. I'm not saying we don't do it. I'm just saying it's a different level of complexity.
But to sort of bring
Mr.
it
Volno?
back, but to bring it back to what Regent Broad had mentioned earlier, that's how we get those localized flexibility and those localized incentives, is by going into each one of those other areas and allowing those units to develop strategies in, let's say, an auxiliary activity that doesn't apply to perhaps a college, but we do build that flexibility into the model that way as well.
Thank you, Regent Devine.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a general comment. First of all, thank you for the wonderful presentation and the time that I've sat on this board. The discussions that we've had, these have really been the most meaty. This past school, actually full calendar year that we, in terms of addressing the issues and bringing these financial issues to us. The other quick comment that I would make is when you look at the slide on 83 there, the importance of the medical area being our number one priority as a board, and you look at the dollars involved in terms of what we're doing, that continued attention that we've got on that whole issue of what we're doing in that whole area, whether it's the actual operations, whether it's the mHealth initiative, and whether it's the physical plant and the facilities issues, it deserves our high attention in the work that we're doing there. And then the other issue is when we get into the whole discussion of the tuition, it's obviously the focus that we've got on this, I think, is correct. It's focused, and the cost of attendance in terms of really understanding the components of how we can balance that off and keep that as a high priority in this leveling out of the tuition that we've done over the past few years and are forecasting to continue to do as much as we can reasonably into the future is fine work. And I want to thank you all for what you've done and thank President Kaler for his leadership in bringing this all together, this discussion that we've now had this last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Devine. Further comments or questions? Further comments, questions on the budget levers? If not, we thank the three of you very much for your work and your staff's work on this issue. Next, we'll consider for action the President's recommended fiscal year 2018-2019 biennial budget request. Joining us is Interim Vice President Volnow and Associate Vice President Tonneson. President Kaler for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I'm actually going to walk through this. I will try to be briefer than I was last month in regards to the story. But I am seeking approval today of the 2018-19 biennial budget request to the legislature. You reviewed this last month, and with the exception of one addition that I will discuss, it is the same as you saw a month ago. I believe this is an aspirational, ambitious, but prudent budget proposal that embraces the needs of our entire system, addresses our commitment to our land-grant mission, and it is designed to keep this university excellent and accessible. Let me review the 6 elements of the request. We're seeking investment from the state to help us fund student success, provide more access to high-demand STEM fields, and provide the workforce for Minnesota. A second round of MnDrive initiatives for our core mission to retain faculty, maintain programs, and limit Minnesota resident tuition increases. The item added since last month is an investment in our world-renowned National Natural Resources Research Institute at UMD, and I'll provide some more details about that in a minute. And then 2 previous items that the legislature did not act on in the last session: funding for critical health training and for the Bell Museum. So I believe if there's one business we can all embrace as a priority, it's our fundamental business of student success, and that's the goal of the Student Success Initiative. We're asking for $8.5 million recurring in FY18 and $5 million in FY19. It helps us create a student success center, enhances equity, and promotes and eliminates the backlog in STEM education. The outcomes will be measurable and meaningful. We'll increase graduation and retention rates. All of our campuses will be enabled to add key talent to the STEM workforce. We'll increase enrollment and retention of students of color, and we'll achieve key goals of the state of Minnesota's dashboard. In fact, all of these initiatives address that in one way or another. The next initiative is a building block on MnDrive. You can think of this as MnDrive 2.0 if you want to. An additional $8.5 million in 18 and $15 million in 19. 4 areas there in the second generation of MnDrive. They align with our grand challenges and our medical discovery team initiative. For instance, improving cancer treatment statewide. It'll be led by our medical school dean, Brooks Jackson, and we'll create a multi-site statewide clinical trial network with an emphasis on trials improving the health for rural Minnesota patients. Next area is around eliminating disparities. It's a bold intention, but we believe we can be a catalyst for closing the various social, educational, and economic gaps that plague our communities in Minnesota. We'll bring into play interdisciplinary research, education, and public policy to tackle these inequities, and the state has too many wide and unconscionable gaps. Clean and precious water clean and abundant water is precious and increasingly at a premium. We're poised to develop new technologies, new models for water quality and quantity monitoring, and help communities manage water usage. We'll continue to lead the way in partnering with the state's water cluster to tackle this grand challenge and again connect with the state's dashboard goal of a clean, healthy environment. Final MnDrive initiative will take advantage of one of our university's greatest strengths and perhaps one that's least known to the general public, and that is a genuine worldwide leadership in data mining, data analysis, or the so-called big data. Right now, we're ranked 4th in the world among academic institutions in the field of data science, and we can build on that. With investments from the state, we'll work with the state's food producers through advanced and precision agroinformatics, and we already have strong partnerships with the like of Winfield Foods, Syngenta, and PepsiCo, and we'll develop even more industrial collaborations. This MnDrive investment will also contribute to breakthroughs in precision medicine, help prepare an emerging cohort of experts in data science for Minnesota's workforce needs in a wide range of Minnesota industries. So I believe the second round of MnDrive will prove as successful as the first and will provide exceptional outcomes and hundreds of partnerships. And the first round of MnDrive has been remarkably successful in generating matching funds from government and industry, hiring faculty in key areas of need, and creating new intellectual property and companies. So we have a great story to tell there. The next component of our request is seeking further investment from the state in our core mission of academic programs and operational excellence across the system. And here we request $22.6 million recurring in 18 and 23 and 19. And as we discussed last month, during this biennium, we are assuming inflationary cost increases of roughly 3% to deliver academic excellence and quality student services, world-class research, and to maintain the technology and equipment infrastructure. And this request of the state covers only 1.75% of that anticipated rise. We'll fill the gap with our own operational excellence cost reductions and by increasing tuition for non-resident, non-reciprocity students. So with this state investment and our internal adjustments, we will retain faculty and staff, maintain key programs, ensure our campus's safe infrastructure, and minimize tuition growth for our Minnesota residents, students. Next is the additional item to our biennial budget request since your review in September. There are many research opportunities developing across the university's research community for which UMD's NRRI is viewed as a valuable partner. Added investment in NRRI and its work will allow partnerships within the university's system-wide research community to grow and will result in statewide impacts. We're seeking $1 million in 18 and an additional $2 million in 19. So the next items of our biennial budget request remain from last session's request, and again, we reviewed them last month. $6 million recurring in 18 and $2 million in 19 to provide support for critical health training and services to the underserved statewide, a renewed effort to enhance access to primary and dental care in greater Minnesota, and to support our highly ranked family medicine program. Final element of the request is that to support the Bell Museum, now under construction, of course, as you know, and our deal with the state to get that built. Again, remember, it is the state's Natural History Museum entrusted to the university to care for, and the operational needs when the new building comes on are $2 million in 18 recurring and additional $3 million in 19. So the summary is shown here. In biennial math, the 18-19 initiative request represents 10.1% over our base level funding. Last biennium, we received a 10.6% increase. The biennial math increase of $126 million. And if we add the two pieces related to prior sessions, the total request is an increase of $147.2 million, or 11.8% over where we are now. We set context for this by a retrospective look at our state appropriations dating back to the Great Recession, 2008. And if we manage our full request this time and adjust for inflation, we are still receiving 5.2% less in funding than we did a decade ago. We're doing more with less. With that, Mr. Chair, members of the board, I seek your approval of our 2018-19 biennial budget request, and the resolution is before you. We're open to your questions and comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would turn to Regent Beeson to provide Finance Committee's recommendation on this request. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Finance Committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the financial components of the President's recommended fiscal year 18 and 19 biennial budget request. Therefore, I move approval of fiscal year 2018-19 biennial budget request.
It has been moved. Is there a second? Second. It's been moved and second. Discussion. Comments? If not, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
I think she meant yes.
Regent Simmons, for clarification, I'm assuming you wanted to vote in the affirmative of approval.
Yes, it was an aye. It was just a little tardy.
Okay, very good. Let the record show state. Very good. The motion does pass. Thank you, Mr. President and members. The board will now consider action on the President's recommended 2016 six-year capital plan and the President's recommended 2017 state capital request. Again, interim President Wolna and Vice President Bertelsen, if you would please join us at the table. President Kaler, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and let me return to the previous docket item and again offer my thanks and congratulations to a really excellent team of people in our finance and budget office that have put together this budget and are working hard on our annual budgets. They do a great job for us. Members of the board, Mr. Chair, I'm now pleased to bring forward for your approval my six-year capital plan and the 2017 state capital budget request. This recommended six-year capital plan includes major capital improvements planned for fiscal years 2017 to 2022, be funded with state capital support, as well as projects funded by the university through a combination of university debt obligations, local unit resources, fundraising, and public-private partnerships. Year one of the capital plan outlines the projects that the university will be submitting to the state of Minnesota for considerations during the upcoming 2017 legislative session. But of course, and unfortunately, they remain from our 2016 request because the legislature did not pass a bonding bill. Interim Vice Presidents Bertelsen and Volna will review our state capital budget request for the upcoming session. So Mike and Mike, welcome and thank you.
Very good. Mr. Volna, Mr. Bertelsen.
Yep.
Please.
Thank you much, Mr. Chair and members. Six-year capital plan remains the same as you saw last month in review, so this will go relatively quickly. Just to review, highlight a few things. The board has set a direction that we will prepare for and present to you a six-year time horizon for the capital plan, that you review this every September and October, and that ultimately as those projects move up, those are included in an annual capital budget. The six-year capital plan assumes a continued emphasis on the same priorities as it was in 2015, with a very limited opportunity to add new projects, especially given, as the President identified, that there was not a bonding bill this last session. The strategic emphases of this project put a strong emphasis on fixing and replacing some of our worst buildings. HEAPR is a cornerstone of that strategy. This plan also proposes three large investments in improving the education and clinical research spaces in the medical school and other colleges in the academic health center. It has a continuation of the 2013 six-year capital plan to renovate and construct and decommission targeted laboratories in St. Paul. And finally, student demand as well as state performance measures related to STEM degrees has increased the need for additional laboratory facilities. Chemistry, as has been talked about today, is a core component of most STEM programs, and an inadequate supply of chemistry labs is currently restricting our ability to meet demand and move students through the necessary course sequences. In addition to the projects identified in the six-year plan before you, we do identify projects under consideration. This represents ideas and plans that people have in their academic and collegiate sort of pre-planning, but yet are not yet developed and far enough along in that planning to be prepared to present to you today.
So the recommended six-year capital improvement plan total cost would be $1,608,100,000. As you can see from the pie chart, 22.3% of that, or $359 million, represents university funding, and as proposed, $1,249,086, or 77.7%, represents state contribution to that capital investment. Financial summary by year, as you can see, broken down each year between state and university. The university's total contribution of $359 over that total six-year plan versus the $1,249,000,000, as I mentioned earlier, for a total of $1,608,000,000. I would say also that in the Finance Committee yesterday, the Finance Committee received an update on the debt capacity study, which showed the impact of both the six-year plan and the 2017 request layered in. And what that showed was that over the course of that plan, when you take into consideration the additions plus the payoffs, the university's total debt goes up by, I believe, about $101 million over that period. So it continues, the plan would continue to keep us within the margins that we strive for by board goals to be a AA1 rated institution.
I think we'll proceed and walk through the state capital request as well. This request is a resubmittal effectively of the 2016 state capital request. Projects have been adjusted for inflation where necessary to maintain the original scope. The one addition is a request for collections and contemporary learning, the design funds in 2017, which we would hope then to submit in a full project in 2018. You can see the list of projects and the finances that go along with each of those. And that ends our presentation.
Very good, thank you. Regent McMillan, would you provide from the Facilities Planning and Operations Committee a recommendation? Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I would indeed. The Facilities Planning and Operations Committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the projects components of the President's recommended 2016 six-year capital plan and 2017 state capital request, and I move adoption of the resolutions.
Very good. Thank you. Regent Beeson from the Finance Committee.
Chair Johnson, the Finance Committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the financial components of the President's recommended 2016 six-year capital plan and the 2017 state capital request. So I second the motion.
Very good. We have moved and seconded for approval of the capital request. Discussion on the motion. Regional Mari, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. First thing, I'm just so excited that Bill's very still on this list. I'm excited for that. Second, so this isn't directly related to the request, but I'm thinking about cost savings in decommissioned buildings as it relates to R&R. So when we decommission a building, where does it just go back to the central fund and then the President decides where to allocate that? What happens when we save on a decommissioning?
Mr. Chair and Regent Amari, so as you maybe know, the university allocates its cost through a series of cost pools. So the cost for any given building is assigned and charged to that college and department for the utilities, the debt, and the operation of that cost. If we remove a building or are able to consolidate space, we just stop charging that college or department those costs, and that becomes part of their available resources, and is part of their annual budget process. So they look at, every year we look at all the revenues and all the costs, so it becomes part of that planning cycle.
Further, Regent Broad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not opposed to the resolutions before us, but what I am opposed to is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. The President is shaking his head because he knows I'm talking about HEAPR. And it seems to me that until we figure out that is not working in terms of our strategy, and bring forward a new strategy, we're doing exactly what Einstein says we shouldn't. So I would just encourage us to really look at, I know we've looked at something before and threw that noodle up against the wall and it fell off, but I think we got to throw a few more up against the wall because HEAPR is falling off and it doesn't sell. It's not a good partnership because it's a one-way partnership that isn't working. So I just really wanted to highlight my concerns over how we approach rehab, and I think that there's other options out there.
Regent Broad, I concur with you, and I don't know if you were part of that decision to change the name from repair and replacements to HEAPR, but most people do not fully understand the implications of HEAPR and that. I think the legislature could consider the change of repair and replacement or some more understandable name. Now, having said that, it's functional within that. What happens? How do you put the list? How do the institutions come forward? And that's what's been problematic. President Kaler.
Thank you, Chair Johnson, Regent Broad. We did throw that noodle against the wall in your Italian metaphor, but not only did it fall off, it bounced back, and so it was not. It was just not a well-received idea. That the idea being, I think, as you all know, to put recurring repair and replacement dollars in our ongoing operating state allocation, and then increase that over time while we feathered down the HEAPR ask. So again. We need to have conversations and lay the groundwork with the legislature and the governor to find a way to do this better. It's a challenge not only obviously for the university, it's a challenge for Minnesota State, it's a challenge for state agencies. We need a better conversation about how to preserve the built infrastructure in all of our state organizations. We will continue to do that. It failed, those conversations failed previously. We will be eager to engage the new legislature in those conversations after November.
Regent Broad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. President. I think that's fantastic. I would encourage us to be leaders in convening that conversation, because I think you're exactly right. I think to bring forward a really new concept around repairing and replacement, and everybody can come up with a cute name around it. I mean, I'll come up with CPR, right? Capital Project Rehab, right? Whatever the name is, it's got to have the right content underneath it. But if we convene that conversation with MnSCU, with the state, I think that will be a better approach than throwing the proverbial noodle at the wall. But I appreciate your focus on that.
Thank you, Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the HEAPR subject, I don't know how we're going to get there, because I think the actual number that we Interim Vice President Bertelsen could comment on this, but I think the last number you gave me was $3.8 billion of deferred maintenance on all our campuses, or maybe that was just Twin Cities, I'm not sure. But $100 million doesn't really make a dent in that number. And I think I know that last year in this year's budget, we actually, for the first time, maybe for the first time ever, started including R&R projects into the tuition increase. And so I would hate to see us having to start increasing tuition to maintain the buildings. So maybe you could give us an idea of what your great thoughts are today.
Thank you, Regent Hsu. Mr. Bertelsen.
Mr. Chair and Regent Hsu, Regents, I think you're right to say that the HEAPR alone is not the solution, and we've never believed that is the whole thing. It needs to be a multi-tiered plan, and so the university over time has created, as you know, auxiliaries, self-fund portions, some better than others, their own depreciation, so there's funds there. We built into the utility rates funds for renewal of the infrastructure. We have campus R&R, as you said, some to some amount that's both use some state appropriation and tuition. In addition, then there's HEAPR. Those are sort of on the one side. On the other side, we have working very hard to identify a plan to remove some of the worst buildings. And on that plan, that target for us is how do we remove Mayo, nearly 1 million square feet of space. So space that you don't have, you therefore don't have to renew. So it has to be a pruning process as well as a revenue process. So there's multiple pieces that go into that mix. And of course, that involves space utilization targets better and more innovative use and assignment to space. So there are a lot of cultural shifts as well as financial plans that go into the collective program, more of a portfolio approach as opposed to one initiative.
Further discussion? Members, I've had discussions with many of you about a particular project, and there have been some suggestions. Has to do with our athletes village and some proposals that surround that. It has to do with the track, with the bubble, and Regent McMillan, and I will be respectful of you as chair of facilities, But I'm going to ask the president for some possible things for us to think about, if you will, and if you'll indulge, President, as we have discussed it this morning. Mr. President?
Thank you, Chair Johnson. And from a agenda point of view, I bring this up predicated on page 149 of your docket, which is funding to be determined under consideration/evaluation. File number 527, which is the athletics facility improvement projects. It's a little bit tangled with the facilities committee report yesterday, and I think it all has to do with a fluid, very fluid and evolving situation around the rec sports bubble, relocation of that, options to do that, the possible partnering with intercollegiate athletics and indoor practice facilities on the athletics village footprint. So I'd just like to take this time and put on the record that we will actively consider and bring back to the board, probably only in a preliminary way in December, but in a more fulsome way in February, options around that I think will lean into to the sports bubble and Athletes Village facilities. I'm not prepared to give you details or costs yet today, but I wanted to go on the record that we will bring that to the group going forward. I think there probably is a better way than where we are now, and I appreciate the good thinking that the Regents have put into it. But I'd like to make that statement, and that will play into, I think, resolutions that'll come out of the Facilities Committee. But given where we are in this budget, I think it's appropriate to bring it up now.
Thank you, Mr. President. Regent Simmons, please.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I just want to express my appreciation for the approach the President and Mr. Bertelsen and the administration are taking on this. They'll be very helpful to me as a regent who's trying to be thoughtful about the long-term as well as short-term utilization of our space and design of our campus. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Regent Simmons. Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. President, for bringing up that conversation now. I just wanted to make sure that when you say Athletes Village, that includes also the potential project currently known as the Lineman's Facility.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair Johnson, Regent Hsu, yes, it does. And I think what has emerged fairly recently are some funding opportunities, some mixed-use space opportunities that we just need time to develop. But that's absolutely part of the conversation for sure.
Great. Thank you very much.
One of the conversations that's come forward is that perhaps this, as it's known as the Lineman's Building, I think we need to change that name, more of a multi-purpose use for this potential structure, which I think would be more useful. I think it would help us in, I think, Title IX discussions and so on and so forth. But I just think if, as the President has stated, if we have 60 days here of thought and planning with preliminaries coming forward in December for the board to consider, and then if so appropriate, take action in February. So that's the reason for the discussion at this point. Further comments on that issue, discussion on the capital budget. Regent McMillan, did you have any comments as Chair of Facilities?
No, I will just add that I think that we too appreciate that as a committee the President's comments there and a deeper look at other alternatives. And I believe, I'm double checking again, but the actions taken yesterday are fully consistent and have enough flexibility in them to accommodate some additional refinement here. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Further comments, Regent Lucas, please.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I'm wondering if that decision impacts the discussion about the removal of the steel elevators, if that gives us more time to look at solutions for that.
Mr. President?
Chair Johnson, Regent Lucas, I remain, the short answer to your question would be, from my point of view, no. I still think that the action taken by the committee to provide some time for the community, but ultimately to take those down is the right decision. We need that land for higher and better use.
Further discussion Further discussion. We have before us a motion to approve the 2016 year capital plan and recommended 2017. Further discussion. Further discussion. Regent Simmons, any discussion items?
The only thing I would add at this point is, again, I appreciate the thoughtfulness here. And our goal as a Board of Regents and University, I believe, isn't just to be in compliance with Title IX, but it's to do what's right for our student body. And that means serving a broad student body.
Very good, thank you. Being no further questions or discussions, all in favor of the motion so indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
The motion does prevail. Thank you. We now turn to the report of the committees. Report of the Litigation Review Committee. Regent Devine.
Thank you, Chair. The Litigation Review Committee met in a special meeting on October 6th, 2016. At the meeting, a resolution was considered and approved that authorized the closing of the meeting to discuss a matter that is subject to the attorney-client privilege. That was all that was discussed. I would move to accept that.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and second. Further discussion? Any discussion? If not, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevailed. Regent Devine? Very good. Thank you. Report of the Governance and Policy Committee. Regent Cohen.
Thanks, Chair Johnson. There were no action items this month. The discussion items were, we first adopted our work plan for the year, and then there were two discussion items. The first one was the Board of Regents Board Policy Development. The committee had a very productive conversation focused on Board of Regents Board Policy Development. The policy is up for comprehensive review, and this discussion gave the committee an opportunity to provide feedback that will yield amendments to the policy. The conversation focused on how effective the board policy process is, excuse me, the relationship between board and administrative policy, and codifying the current board policy review process. The board office will draft language based on the committee's feedback, and the committee will review the draft in December. And actually, these two discussions on two different board policies was particularly robust, even though perhaps they sound a little dry. The next item was the board operations, the fundamental planning documents, committee charges, and required reports. The committee began a year-long review of Board of Regents policy, board operations, and agenda guidelines. And it's because this policy is very complex and long that it's going to be divided into three parts and studied over the year. Yesterday's discussion focused on the fundamental planning documents, committee charges, and required reports outlined in the policy. The committee explored the current committee structure and considered possible alternatives like aligning the committees to content areas or using a committee of the whole or work session format for consideration of fundamental planning documents or major items requiring approval. Mr. Chair, that ends my report.
Thank you, Regent Cohen. And back to you, Regent Cohen, for the report of Academic and Student Affairs Committee. Regent Cohen.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. There was one action item for this committee. The Academic and Student Affairs Committee unanimously recommends approval of the consent report, which includes program additions, changes, and discontinuations. I move adoption of the consent report.
Is there a second?
I so move.
It's been moved and second. Discussion. Discussion on the motion. If not, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevailed. Regent Cohen.
The committee discussed two topics that fit nicely with the priority we set out at the beginning of the year, one of the four board priorities to promote standards of excellence in the student experience at each of our campuses. Our first item was related to academic progress and trends in Gopher athletics. We were pleased to hear from Athletic Director Mark Coyle that it is his philosophy that student athletes are first and foremost students. Vice Provost McMaster and J.T. Burrett director of the McNamara Academic Center for Student Athletes, also discussed the relationships that they have with athletics to ensure the success of Gopher athletes. Graduation rates for student athletes are higher than the average of all students on the Twin Cities campus. 22 of the 23 Gopher sport programs have a team cumulative GPA above 3.0. And so there's a very good story with our student athletes as students. Next, we had a more broad discussion on enhancing the undergraduate student experience. Presenters from the Duluth, Morris, and Rochester campuses took us through the student experience from new students just arriving on campus to enrolled students, all the way to those students nearing graduation. They shared examples from all 5 system campuses of programming that supports students throughout this continuum. Mr. Chair, that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Regent Cohn. On behalf of the Finance Committee, Mr. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had 2 other action items in addition to the biennial budget request and the state capital request. And they are, first, a resolution related to the refunding of debt. The Finance Committee voted unanimously to recommend adoption of the resolution related to refunding of debt. Resolution authorizes the issuance and sale of debt to refund all or a portion of certain outstanding general obligation bonds and to pay the cost of issuance. Due to the low interest rate environment in the municipal bond markets, conditions may become optimal at some time during the next year to realize significant savings through advanced refunding of one or more of these outstanding general obligation bonds. To afford flexibility in timing to match the occurrence of those likely conditions, the resolution delegates to the administration the ability to take action within the next 12 months. I move adoption of that resolution.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and a second. Discussion. Discussion on the motion. If not, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevailed. Regent Beeson.
Second, Mr. Chair, consent report. The committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of the consent report, which includes the purchase of goods and services over $1 million and an update to the Central Reserve's budget. I move adoption of the consent report.
It's been moved and seconded by Regent Omari. Discussion. Any discussion? If not, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Motion prevailed. Regent Beeson.
Mr. Chair, the discussion items for the committee were first, an update on the long-range financial planning. This ties into the conversation we had earlier this morning about budget levers. The committee discussed our planning model. It begins with the baseline impact to the biennial budget request to the state. From there, the committee examined possible scenarios from fiscal year 17 to fiscal year 22. Each of the scenarios highlights the need for the board and administration to look critically at the higher ed business model and consider changes to it. It also shows the need for the legislature to provide baseline core funding to the university and for the board and the administration to continue to work toward higher cost-saving efficiencies. The committee will review an updated long-range financial planning analysis in the spring of 2017. Next, the financial network upgrade project. The committee received an update on the proposed upgrade to our data network infrastructure. The committee heard about the significant increase in usage, devices, and speed requirements, all not unexpected. Expected, however, of the new network. The upgrade of the data network will be system-wide and will ensure a secure, stable, and right-sized network for the near future. The committee reviewed the financial model for the $70 million expected project, which includes revenue from changes to board policy adopted last month. This is a mission-critical investment for this utility. Information items, we received 2 items, update on the enterprise asset management report, and finally, an update on the Greek housing loan program. Mr. Chair, that goes.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. On behalf of the Facilities Planning and Operations Committee, Regent McMillan, please.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. Make sure your coffee cup is full. We have a lengthy report for you. And before I take up the 7 action items we addressed, I want to, first of all, talk about a very important discussion item, ensuring a safe campus. Campus safety, Chief Matt Clark and Director of Emergency Management Lisa Dressler presented to the committee, and we reviewed strong working relationships between UMPD, other law enforcement agencies, key initiatives focused on student, staff, and visitor safety, and looked at crime statistics, and had a good, robust discussion with that group. I start there because the importance of safety is paramount. So then, moving from that item into the first action item, we, in addition to the 6-year capital plan and the state capital request, we began with a capital budget amendment for the CFAN soil testing lab on the St. Paul campus, and the committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of a capital budget amendment for this facility, funded by a state investment in agricultural productivity. Will update infrastructure, improve laboratory investments, and create a more efficient laboratory space there in the Crops Research Building on the St. Paul campus. The total project cost is $3 million. We reviewed schematics, and the committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of that, and I move its approval now.
It has been moved and seconded by?
Second it.
Moved and second. Discussion. Discussion. If not, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Motion prevailed. Regent McMillan.
Thank you. Second item is a resolution related to the demolition of the electric steel elevator property on the Twin Cities campus, the Minneapolis campus. Committee voted to recommend adoption of the resolution related to the demolition of electric steel elevator properties. This was a action item following review and discussion in September, and additional review and discussion yesterday, including a review of the potential for adaptive reuse study, and the fact that the university found no alternatives consistent with its needs, mission, or operational model to pursue. We also discussed at great length historic mitigation measures, archival documentation, salvage, other ways to preserve this, and we had, again, a robust conversation, recognizing more than 100+ comments from the public and strong interest from the community in this topic. The resolution ultimately was adopted by the committee, by a majority of the committee, and I move its adoption now.
It's been moved.
Second.
And seconded. Comments, discussion on the motion. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I opposed the motion yesterday, and I will vote against it again today. I agree with all of the logic behind the determination that's before us, or the recommendation that's before us. I think there is a higher and best use of the broadest part of that property. However, I do believe that timeline opportunities exist to give the broader community the opportunity to identify outside funding. If there is an opportunity to preserve some component of the facility, based on what I've reviewed, I do believe that is warranted. I certainly understand the position and the logic of those who supported the resolution. I was not convinced that we would not have that opportunity to do that and still be able to make the highest and best use. And if the public appetite isn't there to provide resources for that renovation, then I would certainly support the motion as it is. But until we've given that opportunity, I'm not going to support the resolution.
Thank you. Further discussion? Further discussion on the motion. Regent Lucas.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I think, for me, this is a very hard vote. As Regent Rocha and everyone has alluded to, we had over 100 comments ranging all over the country and as far away as Istanbul on this project. I think it's true that these elevators are a historic resource. They're the last ones in Minnesota. They're an engineering accomplishment to actually have done these elevators the way that they did. And I also think it's true that adaptive reuse is going to be very difficult, and that keeping the complex there is not a wise decision. I have a hard time with the resolution because I think it's imperative that we keep elements of this, that we respect the past, that we keep as much as we can, and that we also keep open the possibilities that pieces of this could be used in incredibly interesting ways if Expo comes to that site to interpret the history and the transition from our original farming community to now a high-tech medical corridor. You know, there's a transition there that's interesting to explore. And so I agree with Regent Rocha that we haven't had time really to look at how these elements could be reused or recycled, and how we can honor the past and honor the comments of 100 people that bothered to write to us. Part of me says we should go forward with the resolution, and I know our staff has been, they've read the same 100 comments I have, and they believe, as I do, that there are ways to mitigate this. So I struggle with whether to try to put it off or to trust our staff to come back. I think in the end, they're going to have options of ways that they can interpret this and things that they can save. And so when they come back with the full design, we'll be able to evaluate that, and whether that has cost implications or not, I don't know. So part of me says, let's go ahead with the resolution as it is, trust our staff to honor the opinions of the design community and the historic community, and let's look at it when they bring it back. But that involves bringing it back, which I think many of you don't want to do. So I'll see if anybody else has comments.
Thank you, Regent Lucas. Regent Simmons, any comments on the motion?
No, I think that there has been a great deal of time given to having a community look, including the city of Minneapolis. And I'm going to support the motion, appreciate the discussion, and it was very helpful to hear what my colleagues had to say.
Thank you. Regent Devine.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to support the motion, and I want to, along with Regent Lucas and Regent Rocha, have struggled with the decision here of what we're doing and why we're doing it. The timeline, I guess, is part of what I've considered very carefully. We've reviewed this issue for several years since, well, almost since the day that we purchased the property. It was actually in motion when the demolition permit was applied for by the previous owner. And so I think the issue of coming forth with a funding source is really the issue that I've struggled with. I don't know that it's fair for the university to take on open-ended the cost elements of maintaining the property or maintaining 2 or 3 or 4, whatever, the various things that have been talked about over the last year and a half. And I think in of that, the cost structures that we would face to do that, and the fact that there was no collaborative financial partner that's come along has really driven us to what the decision process was that we've really carefully evaluated these last 60 days in detail, and had the merits of all of the correspondence that's come from the community or the community organizations. So, and we've got it in the motion. I think that the administration does have the option to consider any things, and I think we've heard from President Kaler this morning that there's other options that are going to be viewed in the context of all of what we're doing here. But on this particular element, I think the time has come for us to move ahead based on the information that's been provided to us. And for that, I'm going to support the motion.
Thank you. Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. Just a point of clarification, is the version in our docket materials the version that we're considering right now?
I believe that is correct. Mr. Steves?
Mr. Chair, yes, the version of the resolution adopted by the Facilities Committee is in the Facilities Committee docket.
Okay, thank you. Then could I get someone to just explain to everybody what the last paragraph actually means that we're going to do?
Mr. Bertelsen, Ms. Smith, maybe if you both would like to come forward. Mr. President, any clarifications? Wait for...
Mr. Chair, let me pull it up.
Mr. Bertelsen, Ms. Smith, did you hear the question? Kind of a clarification of the last sentence of the proposed resolution.
Mr. Chair and members, so how we're interpreting that means is that we are going to, as this is passed, we will move ahead with the plans to demolish the elevators. As part of that, though, we will also be considering, as we're doing that planning, how we could save components of it and set those aside, what the cost and means and methods to do that would be. We'll have to make that decision very quickly. So that will be in the next 4-5 weeks. We will make that decision, what we can save, we could set aside. Then once that's determined, we will then, as we move ahead with the design of the bubble, we will consider, and as the resolution says, then come with options for how we could use that as part of a future design for the location. So how could you incorporate those components into the design of the bubble and the field next to it? Either as part of that structure or as part of the site as more of an interpretive or history marker. So there's going to be things, everything from certain. So I'll just stop with that.
I know Regent Hsu has a follow-up, and also Regent Simmons, we'll call on you in a moment. Regent Hsu.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So what I'm hearing is that we're going to demolish it, but it doesn't sound like we're really going to demolish all of it if we decide to not demolish all of it because of the process that you just described.
Mr. Chair and Regent, all of it will be removed from the site. Some of it's going to be demolished in a more aggressive sort of mentality. And pieces of it, we're going to evaluate how we could take apart components of it and what parts could be saved. Now, and that's going to be not on a global scale. There are 32 of those steel elevators, cans, and we are talking about a very, 1 or 2 of those that we're looking at for how could you deconstruct and set aside. So we're going to be just demolishing most of it.
Regent Hsu.
One more follow-up, Chair Johnson. Well, my understanding originally was part of the compensation that we were going to pay for the actual demolition and cleanup of the site was that the vendor that we hired was going to receive the material as scrap metal. And so is there a cost associated to what you're talking about to the university by not giving them, by retaining some of the material?
Mr. Bertelsen?
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Regent, that's true. So for each of the silos, so imagine we're talking about 1 or 2, there are 32 total on the site. So if we take one, that's 3% of that number. So it is a number, but it's not a significant number for the recycling cost.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Regent Simmons, please.
Thank you. Because there have been a few versions discussed of this resolution, and I don't know that I have the current one before me, I want to just make sure I'm clear that this resolution in no way makes a commitment on the future of the bubble.
Regent Simmons, I would ask Chair of Facilities, Regent McMillan, to read the resolution, that particular paragraph, please. Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I will forego the reading of the whereases and read the 2 resolved clauses. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Regents approves the demolition of the electric steel elevator property, period. Be it further resolved that the administration is directed to consider options to integrate elements from the electric steel elevator property with other project components so as to display and interpret the property's historic significance as part of the schematic design phase for the recreational sports bubble.
Very good. Regent Simmons?
I think that's a confusing resolution in that it seems to limit use of any of the bin material to recreational sports bubble, and I didn't think that was the intent. I thought we weren't committing anything about the bubble, and that the decisions about any elements of the bins that could be used in design or preservation would be independent of the bubble.
Okay, Regent Devine.
If we look what is true, it says the phase of the recreational bubble, but we're also directing the administration to consider other options. I think there's enough flexibility in the wording of the resolution to correct any, deficiencies based on what President Kaler is committed to relative to the other pieces of the sports bubble piece that's coming up forth into the future here in December and February.
President Kaler, please.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I would agree with Regent Devine that we certainly have taken the sense of the board on this issue, and we will come back, as I indicated in my earlier remarks, preliminarily in December and subsequently in February. And so I think it's fine. We understand what it means, but to Regent Simmons' point, which is valid as well. And I don't really want to get into a wordsmithing activity here, but we could put a period in this after historic significance period and leave out the part of schematic design for the recreational sports bubble, if that would be the will of the group.
I'd like to propose an amendment to do just that.
Regent Simmons has moved the Kaler suggested amendment. President Kaler, would you read that again for the members of the board?
I would refer you to the last paragraph of the "be it further resolved" statement, and I would say, well, I'll just read it. That be it further resolved, the administration is directed to consider options to integrate elements from the electric steel elevator property with other project components so as to display and interpret the property's historic significance, period.
Regent Simmons has moved the amendment. Is there a second?
I will second that.
It's been second. Discussion on the motion. Discussion on the motion before us on the Simmons amendment.
Would board members appreciate a written copy? Or is it, if anybody does?
Regent McMillan, comments from the chair of facilities.
I can support that amendment.
Okay. Further discussion of the Simmons amendment. Further discussion. If not, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevailed. We now have before us the amended McMillan motion in regard to the bubble, if you will. Further discussion. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. This goes back to the very early part of this conversation, which you indicated that we might be looking at the Gibson, I think you're referring to the Gibson Degurski building as a possible location for this rec sports activity. I might also point out there's an outdoor practice football field. And could that not also hold the bubble, since that field wouldn't typically be used during the cold weather?
The first thought comes to mind, Regent Beeson, is spring football.
I understand that, Mr. Chair, I understand that, but the bubble does get taken down every year by that time of year.
Okay. Very good. Further discussion on the motion, amended motion before us.
I call the question.
I might indicate to the board, before we call the question, would take a 2/3 vote of the board before the question could be called. Is your desire to pursue that or continue discussion?
I'll pull that back.
Okay, very good. Further discussion. Further discussion. Regent Lucas.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I certainly support the Simmons amendment. I'm just having a hard time understanding how the staff is going to evaluate this now that the bubble is not part of the discussion. I mean, I think it's still important that we save elements, and hopefully Expo can help us with historic interpretation and all of the above, but how are you going to analyze this now?
Let me turn to President Kaler, and we would certainly entertain your thoughts, President Kaler, and we also have Regent Rocha. President Kaler.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. Regent Lucas, we very clearly have gotten feedback and guidance from this board that is indicating a strong desire to go in a somewhat different direction than we had originally planned, and that's fine, and that's how it should work. And so what we need to do is go back to our closets and figure out some alternatives that are more in line with what the board has expressed as its desire. And so part of that, I strongly support taking down the elevators. the opportunity to save one or two of them, which of course has a cost. All of this is going to cost money, and propose a variety of options, one of which is an outdoor rec sports field, open space, that maybe has an elevator or part of an elevator at the edge of that space that's valuable. And we'll bring back options like that to you. But, you know, it's a very fluid situation, and we're trying to move fast, and we've gotten guidance from the board that many of you want to consider some other options. We'll develop those options.
Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regent Lucas, as a fellow member of the anguished contingent of the board, I think I understand where the language issue is. When the president uses the word save, one might think that's save in that location. That's off the table with this resolution. With this resolution, it all comes off of that location. So now it's not really related to the sports bubble per se, unless there's a marker of some sort. It's kind of on that space. The issue of the saving under this resolution would be potentially reconstructed in some form in another location for interpretive value and so on and so forth. So that my position is, I think that if we actually put the call out and gave the public an opportunity to identify outside sources, I would not support university resources for it. I don't think it's core enough to our mission. But if there was outside in that location, being that we have some time, I support giving that opportunity. But under this resolution, that opportunity doesn't exist because after we pass it, they will remove all of it from the location. Most of it will be destroyed in the demolition, but some parts will be taken down painstakingly for the potential preservation. But since the sports bubble, as the president identified, is no longer, I shouldn't say no longer, but is not a definite enterprise in that location, that part of that resolution doesn't really make any sense anymore. But it still would have the administration looking for ways of using what's left of the removal to create a representation of that facility.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. Regent Broad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This conversation has got interestingly convoluted. I was for the resolution until I'm now against it. It seems to me that I was firmly aligned with the let's move on it. Because there was a higher and better use for that property in the form of the bubble. And so to put the bubble there, you need to remove the elevators. That makes sense to me. I'm with that. But when you take out the concept of putting the bubble there, I don't understand what higher and better use that we're now going to spend the money to tear down the elevators would be for. So I'm now put in the position of, okay, so if we're not going to use the land, why on earth would we spend the money to tear down these elevators? So for me, if there was a use for that property that was better, I'm with you. I understand the historical conversation, but the higher and better use is not the elevators, clearly. So, Mr. President, I was, I think, part of the Let's Move Fast train, but now I don't know why we would spend the money to tear them down if we don't have a use for it.
Thank you, Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. I would characterize the highest and best uses of the land from the very lowest is the elevator use. The second is the bubble. And third is a building that's substantial, either owned by the university or by someone else. So I think there is a development opportunity on that site. So that's how I'd categorize the highest and best uses. I think there is something that could be done with that site. For myself, I'm not against the bubble going there necessarily, but we should, if there are better sites, let's look at that and turn this into a real estate development or a green space, whatever we decide that we want to.
Thank you. President Kaler.
Thank you, Chair Johnson, Regent Broad. We are building the track on the site where a bubble is part of the year and where a softball field and a rec sports field is. And we need to replace, in my opinion, the rec sports field and the softball field. I think the grain elevators are an attractive nuisance for vandalism, for potential harm to people. I think they need to be taken down, and I think a better use of that space is to replace the space we're taking away from rec sports by locating the track there.
Regional Meyer, you'd had your hand up earlier. Do you still have comment or question?
Thank you, Chair Johnson. First, I think these are very easy questions, but first one is, did we already pay for the demolition? Like, we're already contracted, right? Yes. So we're spending the money.
That's correct.
Okay. And then the second question is, and I know this is not about the bubble. I want to make that clear. This is not about the bubble. This is not an Office of Student Affairs thing. So if anybody's going to, pick this up anywhere, blame us, not the Office for Student Affairs. Is this going to slow down our timeline, which will also impact funding or cost of the entire Athletes Village project?
Mr. Brittleson?
Mr. Chair and members, I'm a little bit of a loss because I think there's conversations that you all have had that I don't know yet. So what I can say is it depends on choices. So currently the plan up till yesterday's facility meeting was that we would move ahead with the demolition of the elevators. So we would build a new rec sports space first before moving on to track, and so that they would not have any downtime, that students would have full access to the same programming without being impacted. And if then track would follow from that. So anything that shifts that calendar, which is very tight, will either have some impact. It's either going to be either and. Rec sports not having that continuous service of opportunity to program, or moving both of those programs back, which would certainly have a cost implication to the project. But I don't know exactly all the components of that discussion.
Thank you. Regent Devine.
One of the other issues that was brought up yesterday, since we've acquired the property, there's a number of safety issues that relate to these buildings and the outside people that have come onto the property and access these other, elevators in the area and so on. And we do have a liability issue, which was one of the reasons that was talked through yesterday for the demolition. The other thing on the rec sports field, I think what we've done with what President Kaler has said is to direct that, because the talk has been about the bubble, but there's also the fields that are adjacent to it that we will look for the proposal in December about how we would address those additional items. I don't think it would preclude us. And Vice President Bertelsen unfairly hasn't been involved in the discussion that happened here, overnight maybe. But the point is that we are going to look at those options in terms of what's going to happen here going forward on those replacement of those fields, so that we don't have the downtime or some of the downtime that we're talking about here relative to the rec sports impact.
Thank you. Regent McMillan.
In light of that further conversation, I don't have anything to add. We need to move forward, as Mr. Bertelsen said, and move on the demolition. And then I think the way we've opened this up with the amendment, we can do a number of things, including potentially still doing the bubble there. But President Kaler and his team are going to come at us with some other options. But we are not going to delay demolition of the elevators.
Thank you. Regent Cohen.
Thanks, Chair Johnson. I just wanted to say I sort of sense that I'm in the same boat that Mr. Bertelsen's in, that I don't know when, I didn't know that these conversations were taking place. I was still going on the resolution that Regent Broad was going on. And so I think somehow there hasn't been an exchange of information to understand what's really happening.
Regent Cohen, there have been hundreds of conversations about this, and formal and informal, and it's all coming to fruition here at the 11 o'clock hour. So there are no secrets. It's out in the open, and we're going to decide as a board how to move forward. I can well assure you that. Okay. Regent Simmons, any comments?
Yes, I would just like to say the intent of my motion was well stated by Regent McMillan. I think this is a very high value university campus area, and we need to get rid of the green bins because they are a liability, not an asset, and no one's come forward who can save them in their current location. There's an opportunity to save some or part of them in another location, number one. Number two, I would really appreciate the thoughtfulness of saying, okay, maybe it's the bubble or maybe it's not, but we can take a little time beyond today, go forward with the demolition plan, and then the most thoughtful use of that space.
Very good, thank you. Any further discussion on the amended motion? Regent Hsu.
One final question on this. I kind of regret bringing these guys up here to answer the question, but in light of the change in the amended motion, are you still planning on retaining one or two of these things in such a way that they can be reused?
Mr. Bertelsen.
Mr. Chair and Regents, we will, based upon this resolution, I believe that that's the direction of the resolution as I hear it read.
President Kaler.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. Regent Hsu, yeah, that is clearly the direction that the board, presuming this passes, as indicated, and we work for you, so that's what we'll do.
Thank you.
Very good. Not being any further comments or discussion, all those in favor of the amended motion indicate by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? No. There's, the motion does prevail. Thank you very much. Regent McMillan.
Very good. Our third action item is a capital budget amendment for the intercollegiate athletics, track and field facility, and the rec sports facility relocation. And this is action on an item discussed at the September meeting as well. The committee voted to recommend approval of the capital budget amendment for the track and field facility and the rec sports facility relocation, which I believe we have all just considered. The track and field facility being built in the athletics village or at the athletes village displaces the bubble and then requiring the bubble to be moved. So the amendment to the capital budget is for $13 million to build the track and field and $6 million to move the bubble and, importantly, the softball fields. So that's what's before us. That's what we've approved. If President Kaler and Vice President Bertelsen and the team come back with something, I assume we can amend this again. So I move approval of the capital budget amendment in the amount of $19 million for those two components, and the committee voted to approve that yesterday.
Second.
Been moved and second. Discussion. Mr. Chair. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the discussion yesterday, I expressed that I could not more strongly support the track in that location. But at the time, I was not comfortable passing a resolution to place the bubble in the location that was being defined. I asked the committee to split the resolution so the track was one vote and the replacement of the bubble was a separate vote, which deadlocked, failed on a 3-3. In light of the President's comments and the fact that we will be talking about options in upcoming meetings, it would seem more appropriate now to separate the two, not necessarily to defeat the second portion, but to table it until such time as the President and his administration have a chance to come back with us after looking at some options. So I move to bifurcate the motion into the motion on the track separate from the motion on replacing the bubble at this time.
Regent Rocha has moved to divide the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Regent Simmons did, yes.
Okay, it has been moved in second. Discussion. Discussion on the motion to divide the motion. Regent Anderson.
I just have a question. Maybe I'm confused because I don't know exactly what the motion says. I didn't pull it up here. Can we go ahead and appropriate the money and build the track without the bubble being moved because the bubble is on the position where the track would be? Do I have a problem? Am I the only guy who sees that?
No.
President Kaler.
Thank you, Chair Johnson, Regent Anderson. No, that is the problem. So if you're gonna allocate money to build the track, then you need to allocate money to relocate the rec sports facility, which we would put current planning on the site where the grain elevators are, and that costs money. It does. Is it going to cost as much as rebuilding the bubble there? No, but it's a cost, and we need authorization to spend that money.
Further discussion?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair,
Regent Simmons.
for clarification, what you're talking about says there will be a bubble, but we don't know where. Is that correct, if this motion is approved as it's written?
Regent Simmons, the motion is now divided.
Okay.
No, it's proposed to be divided.
We have before us whether to divide it.
Okay.
It's just a motion.
President Kaler, help us understand, because we would give courtesy to Regent Rocha's motion to divide. And courtesy is, which one do you vote on first? And I'm thinking through this, that it triggers some financial complications.
Chair Johnson, it does, and it's a little bit complicated to know how to proceed because we will need authorization to move the rec sports bubble. So perhaps Vice President Berthelsen has a suggestion.
Mr. Berthelsen.
Mr. Chair and Regents, I'm going to say one sentence and then give it to AVP Smith. I believe we have currently what is proposed, and we have a draft or contract for, is a combined design build for the two of these things, and tabling one would effectively break that apart. I think it creates challenges for proceeding with either one of them, and certainly has time implications of designing the bubble. But you would have anything else?
Vice President Smith?
Just a small clarification on what Vice President Berthelsen said, which is we're actually in the interviews on Monday morning for the contract, which is a design build contract. And so the two of them are inextricably linked together in order for the field to move ahead. Now, I don't think it necessarily has to be site-specific, as you're all talking about, that we could take that time. However, that does have potential of a schedule impact to do that.
If I understand
Mr.
it,
Chair.
Ms. Smith, if we were to approve the 13 million of track portion and defeat the bubble, we're going to build a track, but the bubble is still there.
Chair Johnson, Regents, yes, that's correct at that point.
Okay, Regent Simmons.
Yes, I apparently injected a complication that's not possible to do. But my intent was going forward with the track and not committing to a location for the bubble. That's all I was trying to do. And if that is not possible because these are so tied up together, then I'll withdraw my second.
Okay, you are withdrawing the second to the Rocha motion to divide the two issues?
Well, what I understood is they can't be divided. That if we're going to go ahead with the track, we have to go ahead with appropriating adequate money to move the bubble. I was trying to prevent a foregone conclusion of where that bubble was going to be.
Well, as a practical matter, it doesn't work, but you can by motion do it, but it doesn't work.
I decided not to do something that doesn't work.
Okay. Regent Rocha, your motion second has been withdrawn.
Mr. Chair, I'll withdraw the motion as well. There's obviously a lack of clarity here. I think that there are probably 10 or 11 different understandings. Maybe two of us share the same one, but maybe none of us do. Because when I look at the funding, my presumption was the funding for the track included preparation of the space, which would include removing the bubble as it is. And that my understanding was the $6 million for replacing, for moving the bubble would have been then the new construction of the bubble, including prep of whatever site that would be. Am I misunderstanding that?
Associate Vice President Smith.
Thank you, Chair Johnson, Regent Rocha, Regents. I would actually have to go back and look at the detail of that budget to be able to make sure I was 100% correct. Having said that, my base instinct is that each includes the site preparation for its own. However, the Athlete Village site preparation removes all of the bubble component. So then there's no bubble.
So if the motion is passed, we no longer have the Rocha-Simmons motion before us. If the motion is passed and we're back here in December, would this be correct that, well, I'm going to ask the president, what, if the motion, McMillan motion is passed, what would the $13 million/$6 million, where would we be?
Chair Johnson, I will attempt to answer that question. My understanding, the direction the board has given us over the past couple of days is you want a real hard look at whether or not the bubble should go on the steel elevator site, whether it should go somewhere else, or whether we should replace the indoor facility for recreational sports with some other solution. We will take that guidance and move forward. What we're asking for you to authorize now is the funding necessary to build the track and relocate the bubble. If the board subsequently decides to not relocate the bubble or to do it in a different way, then we would amend this amendment to reflect that direction. So to me, my recommendation would be to approve the allocation that's in front of you, recognizing that we have additional guidance that gives us the flexibility to go ahead and do our work.
Thank you. Regent Lucas?
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I'm wrestling with the $6 million for the bubble. Does that include the demolition of the elevators?
Chair Johnson, Regent Lucas, Regents, no, it does not. The demolition of the elevators is a separate project.
And from what budget does that come?
Regent, Ms. Smith? Bertelsen?
I'm going to ask Mr. Volna to come talk about that one.
Demolition dollars of the elevators comes from what pot of money?
Chair Johnson, members of the board, the cost of the demolition was paid for as part of the purchase price when we bought the land because the previous owner had already contracted with a demolition firm, and we assumed that contract when we bought it. So that money's out the door. It's a sunk cost. It's already been paid.
Very good. Thank you. Regent Mari?
Yeah, I just want to remind folks that, you know, the timing of this is critical because the bubble is funded by student fees. And so this is student fee space. And so to have thousands of students out of a place to go when they're funding it in their fees, is that even legal? So I think we got plenty of lawyers. But I think we need to be very mindful of, in my head, not having a place for students to go, whether it's the bubble with a top or not, is unacceptable.
Regent Anderson.
I would concur with Regent Omari. With this caveat, is the bubble, I'm under this understanding, it's either up for this winter season or will be up for this winter season on its current location. So we are going to vote for funding for the track and the bubble to be moved to a different location. If we decided that by December, we are still able to do that, are we not, wherever that location is? The bubble is still up till May. Is that my assumption? Is that correct?
Mr. Bertelsen?
Mr. Chair and Regents, for this winter, that's true. The caveat, which I'll look to Suzanne to make sure I'm saying correctly, is we had a very aggressive timetable, so to take it down and start site preparation on the new site right away so that we can build the new bubble and be operational in time for the next time period and then proceed directly into track. So we will do as the President said, we will do what the board directs, but it does have time implications. Potentially, can we meet the fall opening of fall of 18 for track or impact negatively the opening of the rec sports?
Regent Anderson?
And what I'm trying to get my hands around, again, I haven't been privy to all the conversations, but it sounds like what President Kaler talked to us earlier about today. He may have a solution for if that doesn't happen by 2018. I don't know. But I, again, with Regent Omari, that the bubble needs to, but the funding is not site-specific. The funding is not site-specific. So we could go ahead with the funding of the 13 and 6 and just make our promise to these students, we're going to get this thing up by 18, which is, fall of 18, which is, or is it fall 17?
Regent McMillan.
17.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. To answer Regent Anderson's question, and I've had a similar one from my colleague, this is a motion to approve a capital budget amendment. It is not language specific, it is dollar specific. It authorizes the dollars to go forward. I think with President Kaler's commitment and Vice President Bertelson's commitment, we're going to look at other options but we cannot hold up the funding or we end up exactly in the hole that Regent Omari just talked about. We do not have the luxury of a lot of time. We need to keep moving.
Okay, we're going to conclude this shortly. Last questions, comments? Regent Broad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a strong supporter of this resolution. I think we got to move forward. But what I'm confused about is this conversation around that 12 of us are having about where the bubble ought not be. So I assume when the bubble presentation was brought to us in the first place, that there was a conversation with rec sports, student groups, et cetera, about what the best location for the bubble to be. And that there was buy-in by each of those entities about where is the best location for the bubble. And if that didn't occur, then that needs to occur before things are brought to us. If it did occur, then we are absolutely disrupting a set of conversations about where the students want it, not where the 12 of us want it. So I guess I'm confused about why we're cherry picking locations for a bubble from our ivory tower.
If I may.
Mr. President.
Chair Johnson, Regent Broad, yeah. We brought forward a recommendation for locating a sports bubble on the place where the grain elevators are. It's slightly closer to Pioneer Hall. It's close to a lot of student housing. That was our best recommendation, and a fair number of your colleagues don't like that a bit and see other elements that lie into this, and it becomes a much more complicated situation. And we're trying to provide you with options, which we can't do overnight. So we're going to bring you some in December.
Yeah, Mr. President, I appreciate the the flexibility that you provide this board. I guess I'm calling us out on the carpet a little bit. As I think through kind of how decisions are made, this is student money. And students were engaged in the process, and it's a facility aimed for student use. And I just think for me, this has gotten extremely convoluted, and it feels as though it's just very tangential right now to the interests that we're set out to accomplish. So I appreciate the position that you're in. But I would, if it wasn't noon almost, I would probably put a motion, try to amend this motion to actually build the bubble, to go back to where you started, which was which engaged the interest groups that I think we need to engage.
Mr. Chair.
But I won't.
Regent Moshe.
Thank you. Based on what the President stated a little bit ago, I'm going to support it today. I opposed it yesterday with a different understanding of the effect of the resolution, and with that conversation coming up, I don't agree with Regent Broad. Certainly, I hold as very important the processes that go on within the institution, and certainly with students and their funding. But they weren't posed with the same scenario that we have right now. They were not given the same consideration. There are multiple parts to this. And had they faced all the same elements of what we're facing right now, whether it's with our intercollegiate athletic facilities, whether it has to do with some of the other things that are occurring going forward, they also weren't being asked, and I know there's one of our colleagues that has a particular consideration about constructing something that is in the zone of discovery as a potential facility that would be part of our core mission. Students weren't asked, do you want to do this at risk of not putting a scientific discovery facility in that location? So to that extent, I think that it's very important that they want it, but I don't think that's the question that was really posed to them in the same way that it's posed to us. And so I do think that it's an appropriate conversation for us, and that their input on it is very important, but I also think that the idea that we would simply say, well, you've got a process, you've made a decision with a different set of variables, we don't have any right to review that, I wouldn't support that approach.
Further discussion on the McMillan capital budget amendment? Further discussion? If not, all in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion prevails. Does anybody want to buy a bubble? Very good, thank you. Regent McMillan.
All right, we will move on with transactions from yesterday that the committee voted unanimously to recommend the purchase of 3 parcels of property, 2.7 acres, located directly adjacent and contiguous to the electric steel elevators. These are the Matheson elevators. The purchase price for the property, $1.3 million, to be paid in cash at closing, expected to occur on or before October 31st. The committee voted to approve that capital budget amendment, and I move its approval now.
It's been moved. Is there a second? Moved and second. Discussion on the motion. Discussion on the motion. If not, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevailed. Regent McMillan.
In a connected action, the committee also voted to recommend approval of a capital budget amendment in the amount of $2.5 million to fund the demolition of the elevators located on the property we just approved the purchase of. Those are the Matheson concrete grain elevators. The committee voted to approve that, and I move that amendment now.
Been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and second. Discussion. Discussion on McMillan motion. If not, all in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. Regent McMillan.
2 more action items. The committee voted unanimously to recommend the sale of approximately 159 acres of Umore Park land in Rosemont to Opus Development Company to pursue a industrial business development park there. This has been reviewed by the committee, and yesterday they acted to move its approval. I move it now before the board.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
So moved.
It's been moved and second. This is the Umore Park.
Yes, Umore Park Opus Property Development sale, 159 acres.
I want to note in the audience is Dwight Johnson, the city administrator, and Kim Lundquist, director of community development from Rosemont. Thank you for being here, and I'm sure you're enlightened after our discussion about a bubble.
Put it in Rosemont.
Would you like a bubble in Rosemont? You wish to, we're pressed for time, but if you want 30 seconds, you may. If not, please, Mr. Johnson, thank you for being here.
Yes, Chair Johnson and Regents, thank you very much. This is a big step forward for the city of Rosemont and for Umore Park, and we appreciate the work on it. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks for being here. On the motion, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevailed. Regent McMillan.
Last item is the consent report that the committee voted unanimously to recommend approval of. This consent report includes the Minnesota United contract to utilize TCF Bank Stadium for 2017 and a portion of the 2018 season. I move adoption, and with that, I would be done.
It's been moved. Is there a second? Second. It's been moved and second. Discussion. Regent Lucas.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I just want to point out that part of this contract provides $1,500 per game to the Neighborhood Alliance.
Excellent.
I think is very positive.
Very good. Thank you. On the motion, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion prevailed. Regent McMillan.
That concludes my report.
Very good. Thank you. Report of the Faculty and Staff Affairs Committee, Regent Simmons.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I would like to ask the Vice Chair of the committee, Regent Hsu, to please present our report.
Vice Chair of the Committee of Faculty Staff, Regent Hsu, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Chair Simmons. We had 3 action items. I believe, yes, three action items. First was the collective bargaining agreement with the Minnesota Public Employees Association representing police officers and sergeants. The committee unanimously recommends the approval of a bargaining agreement with the Minnesota Public Employees Association representing police officers and sergeants. The agreement covers 53 employees on the Duluth, Morris, and Twin Cities campuses. I move approval of the bargaining agreement.
It's been moved by Regent Hsu. Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and second. Discussion. Discussion. If not, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevailed. Regent Hsu.
Next, we have the consent report. The committee unanimously recommends approval of the consent report, which includes the appointment of Brian D. Burnett as Senior Vice President of Finance and Operations and conferral of tenure for 7 outside hires. I move approval adoption of the consent report.
Second.
Been moved in second. Discussion. Regent Omari.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to note that the Dr. Burnett hire, 3 of us were liaisons on that committee, and thank you to my colleagues. And the second thing I want to point out on the 7 hires, as you look through your items, just pay note to the colleges that we're building up and that we're putting targeted hires in different areas, particularly around the College of Arts in this vote here.
Very good. Thank you. On the shoe motion. On the shoe motion, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion prevail. Regent Shu.
Next, we have the resolution related to the Fair Labor Standards Act. In the committee discussion on changes to the Fair Labor Standards Act, we were briefed on changes that take place on December 1st, 2016 that require employees to earn at least $913 per week, equivalent to $47,476 per year, in order to be exempt from earning overtime. This has significant financial implications for the university, and postdoctoral associates were identified as one employee group that would have the largest impact. In order to remain in compliance, Vice President Brown made the decision to raise the salary floor for that employee group to avoid time tracking and overtime pay. During our conversation, Regent Omari presented a resolution that would ratify the administration's actions and call for an update on the status and impact of this implementation at the February 2000, I think it should be 17, says, 17, faculty and staff. Is it 17 or 18?
Mr. Steves?
Mr. Chair, it is February 2018, which would be 1 year post-implementation.
Okay, February 2018, Faculty and Staff Affairs Committee meeting. The committee unanimously supported the resolution. I move approval of the resolution.
Second.
Been moved in second. Regent Simmons, comments to the motion.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The administration's response to the federal unfunded mandate, if you will, the committee thought was the prudent one. Ordinarily, we would not necessarily have to have Regent authority to approve the change because it does not result in any change in the overall university budget, since the extra costs will be borne at the local level with shifting other costs. However, because this goes on into the future and those amounts of money may change, we considered it significant enough that the region should be not only aware of it, but take action, and we chose to unanimously to ratify. Thank you.
Very good. Further comments on the shoe motion? Further comments? If not, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevailed. Regent Shu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had 2 discussion items. The first one was on the PeopleSoft Human Resources Management System, HRMS upgrade. We heard about the ongoing improvements and the challenges the upgrade has presented. Amy Kucera, Senior Director of OHR Operations, likened the upgrade to moving from a flip phone to a more sophisticated smartphone. She explained that our smartphones, the HRMS system continues to update regularly to add features and security. HR professionals are just starting to explore the new features of the HRMS system. Associate Vice President Klatt shared that the full audit report will be completed soon, but that the initial findings are providing important data to guide future improvements of the system. Finally, the committee discussed leadership development opportunities for faculty, staff, and graduate students on the Twin Cities campus. Provost Hanson, Vice President Brown, Vice Provost Ropers-Hulaman, Vice Provost Lanyon, and Brandon Sullivan, Director of Leadership and Talent Development in OHR, shared the importance of leadership development on campus on all levels is critical for faculty, staff, and graduate students to successfully carry out the mission of the university. The committee was pleased to hear that leadership development is not reserved for only those in management positions, but spans the full spectrum of leadership, including the field shapers in our faculty. Mr. Chair, this concludes my report.
Very good. Thank you. Is there any old business to come before the board? Any old business? If not, is there any new business to come before the Board of Regents for our October meeting? If not, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move.
Move and second. All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, we are adjourned.
Well then.